Welcome back to another episode of Art Chats, this time with a returning guest, the incredible Eisner Award-winning illustrator and visual artist Anand Radhakrishnan. Our journey with Anand began on Clubhouse back in 2021, where we sparked a conversation about the dynamic landscape of the graphic novel industry and the tools that artists wield in their craft. Today, Anand is back on this podcast to share more about the tools of the trade, as well as details about his latest venture, which is a personal project very close to his heart. Anand's work has captivated audience with its uniquely graphic approach and visually stunning aesthetic in the realm of mixed media. As we explore his new storytelling endeavor, we delve into how artists can embrace the new and abstract in their work, pushing the boundaries of creativity. Anand will also share insights on how fellow artists can embark on their writing journey, unlocking the potential to bring fresh and captivating stories to the world. Before we jump into this episode, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell to stay updated on all the exciting content we have lined up. Don't miss out on future episodes where we unravel the secrets of the creative process and bring more news and thoughts about building a truly fulfilling creative career. Without further ado, let's dive into episode number 7 with Anand Radhakrishnan and your host Ayan DC. Finally got time to do this because I think we discussed back in February or something.
No, it's been a while that we've been discussing this.
And the biggest complaint that I got with the Clubhouse stuff was everyone was being like, "Why didn't you record it? Why isn't there any evidence of this thing ever happening?" I'm like, sorry.
Yeah, and I think you did a bunch of these, right? You did like 10?
Yeah, I did 10 of those, and then I went on a social media hiatus for a while. But because of that, what happened? One of the last episodes that I did, which was on Instagram with Pablo Carpio, that one never got it got recorded, but they removed it. I think they did some kind of text change for Instagram. So when you go to that episode, it's not there anymore. So I'm like, okay. Best scenario was doing like a YouTube thing now.
Oh, that's a bummer. No, but I think the good thing is that you build the confidence to do it, right? Like, you know how to do it. You know how to do these conversations with people, right?
Confidence comes and goes with this thing because like at this point I know you frankly pretty well.
Yeah.
But still, like before the call, I'm like, oh god, okay.
Yeah.
Let's keep my calm. Like it'll be amazing. But it's been fun, and you were the first guest on Clubhouse.
Oh yeah.
It began with it. I mean, for people who don't know, like this began because of a conversation we had around that time. Because I think what happened was you were invited as a guest on another panel for Clubhouse.
Right.
And then we had a messaging back and forth saying that it's a little confusing because there's too many people talking together.
Oh yeah.
So we decided why not we just do like a one-on-one interview thing. And it was frankly pretty great. I mean, I kind of enjoyed it at that point, but it's just the app was not sufficient enough to record things. Now you can record stuff on Clubhouse, but it was a phase at that point. It's not around as much anymore.
Yeah. I don't think I've seen Clubhouse around as much. We used to during COVID, but I think it's one of those things that became popular just because people were stuck at home and they didn't get a chance.
They were struggling just hearing another person's voice.
Exactly. I think it's one way to just connect with people in an audience. And I even saw like people doing stand-up and doing a bunch of different things, and it even got political in Clubhouse, and I don't know the kind of things that people are doing. Like it's insane.
Were you like regularly in attendance for some of
those
things?
No, I was not. But I was listening to a podcast at the time of I forget what it's called, but it was a bunch of stand-up comics of in the US, like Desi stand-up comics in the US, right? And they were discussing that some of them were doing like gigs because stand-up was affected quite a bit because of this, right? Because of COVID. So a lot of them were doing Clubhouse gigs, and I think it was behind a paywall or something. I'm not sure how they did that, but a lot of people were doing these performances on Clubhouse and Discord and stuff. So I think around that time it was a perfect thing to come up during a pandemic, and I think as soon as people found the chance to get out, it kind of died.
But then again, like for stand-up comics, I feel having to perform with no audience in front of you, everyone's on mute. So even if they have to laugh, they have to switch on the mic
Yeah,
and laugh.
exactly.
It does. It's
That's
not
so
the same thing.
awkward, right?
It's almost like watching sitcom without the laughing audience,
Exactly.
right? So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
not
Although,
a
like,
both way this thing.
yeah, exactly. And also, like, because I think stand-up is a very organic art form, right? Because these guys
Right.
like test their jokes in front of their audience too,
Of
like
course.
how it gets a response, and you get instant feedback, and then
Mhm.
you kind of mold your routine from whatever response you're getting, right?
Right.
So I'm guessing audio only wouldn't work because you also it helps to see what the artist is doing and how the audience is reacting. So it's you're right. Like it'd be funny if people have to keep like pausing for people to laugh. I mean, it's so awkward.
Yeah, like it's hard to emulate that in-person experience on like an app where you can't even see the other person. So
Yeah.
but anyway,
But
I don't know how to like you are a pretty well-known name in the industry. So like giving you an introduction and like everyone knows you at this
yeah, I
point.
don't. Yeah, it's so funny, right? I didn't even know what like I don't know what like being well known. Like I don't know what that means because it's such a
Mhm.
small sphere anyway. Like
Right.
it's a small community of artists, entertainment designers, and
Right.
illustrators in India. That
Mhm.
and even there are different pockets, right? There's like a
Mhm.
whole different scene of fine artists and portrait artists and people who
Right.
do only portraits for a living. There are people from the game design, entertainment design industry.
Right.
There's a comic scene. There's so many different, even in India, which is like, and I'm sure that the Indian community is smaller than
Mhm.
say the US, say the American industry.
Right.
And even there, like, there are so many people. Like it's I don't know I don't think I would even say that I like people like a lot of people know me, and I don't know if that's for a reason because I don't really like I don't socialize much, and I need to get back on that. I need to try and put myself out there.
What's
Like
your
it's
what's
I
your,
feel
what's your
like
so what's your weekly socializing limit now? Like, what do you do? Do you head out, meet
dude,
friends?
so I feel like I'm the kind of person who has like a battery life, you know.
Okay.
So if I so it's like I have like a social battery. So
Right.
if I go and meet people, I'm on that timer.
Right.
Like I can only be out and be on for like 2 hours, 3 hours,
Mm.
and then I can feel that battery getting, start that
Right.
red bit on the battery showing. At that point, I'm like, okay, you know what? I'm gonna head back now. And then
Right.
as soon
Right.
as it's weird because it's like you don't think of socializing as a physical activity, right?
Mhm.
And but it's not. But at the same time, like as soon as I'm back and I enter the house, like I can feel the drain. Like holy shit!
Right.
Nisha and I constantly discuss this. Like whenever I come back after like meeting people, even if it's
Uh-huh.
like a social call, just going and meeting folks. Like as soon as I'm back, I'm like totally drained. I'm like, oh fuck! Like I have no energy left for anything else today. So it must be an introvert thing. I don't know what it is.
I think it's also probably the kind of people you meet because if someone, like, for example, of course, Nisha, but also Swapnil, who's a good friend of yours,
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
if you sit with him, you can
right,
feel, I think you both are on a similar energy level as well.
right,
So if
right.
someone's highly extroverted, that energy
Correct,
kind of, like, unless you
correct.
are open to that, you will feel a bit more exhausted with a person who's that open
Yeah,
to
yeah.
discuss.
No, no.
So that
Yeah,
exhausts you a little bit further.
yeah. No, that's fair. But I think it's also one of those things like everything else in life. I think you can train for it, and
Hmm.
I don't think I have put any energy into that.
Hmm.
And I think that's one skill that I would really like to have. Like at some point, I would love to develop the skill to go out and meet people, talk in
Right.
public, and just be a little bit more social. Because I mean, I do like people. It's not like I don't like people.
Right.
I'm an introvert for sure, 100%.
Hmm.
But I do enjoy being around people and like meeting people and stuff. So I would love to at some point develop that skill. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, it's a little weird because like I really enjoy working in public, like
Right.
going and setting up in a cafe or something, sketching in a cafe or writing in a cafe. And I don't really mind. I put my earphones on, and I like the presence of people around me. Like
Hmm.
I like the chatter, I like the white noise, I like the background,
Wow. Okay.
people talking. So I don't really mind that. Uh, I mean, interacting with people, I'm not 100% sure about, but
Right.
having people around is nice. Like I wouldn't mind it.
So you're comfortable finding that zone for you, even in like a bustling place. Like you don't get distracted too much if people are talking around. Like you can find your own sense of inner peace, like focusing on the thing that you do.
100%, 100%. Yeah, in fact, I prefer it. I can't deal with silence.
Oh wow, okay.
Yeah, it's weird because like I'm a city boy, right? Mumbai. So I mean, I've always been around noise. Like especially like the sound of trucks, and so I grew up in Vadala, and I grew up next to like the four road, which is like a giant, like a highway, like a basically four roads right along each other, and like all day, all night, you have like heavy trucks and you have like very obviously there's traffic, there's trucks going on like, all night, all day. So I grew up with that sound. So so at this point, like I just can't do without. Like the area I live now is fairly it's fairly inside, and there's lots of green, so I can't really hear traffic a lot. But now there's some work going on, some construction going on. It doesn't affect me a lot. Like, I can sleep through that. So I'm okay with city sounds.
Wow. So like how is like because I've never been to Bombay, and I hate the fact that I've never been to Bombay, because I always hear like every Mumbaiker that I speak to, they always tell you will only understand Bombay once you experience it first, and like no one can explain it to you exactly. But like since you grew up there, how was life like in Bombay? Like now I'm pretty sure it's quite a bit different, but a lot of your work kind of speaks towards the noises and the sounds, the whatever experiences your senses taken from Bombay as a city. So how was life like for you as you were growing up, like school and everything, with friends?
I don't have anything to compare it to be honest, because I haven't lived in any other city, right?
Right.
So I've always lived in the city, so I don't really know how to compare it. But yeah, I mean, I stayed in Vadala, like I mentioned, for over 15, 16 years. That's nice. We lived in a PNT colony. Like my mom used to work for the telecom. Like she used to work for MTNF, right? So we used to stay in the quarters there. And before that, we used to stay in Andheri till I was in fourth standard or so. And from fifth standard to like all the way like after college, we were in Vadala.
Right.
And from there, we went to Chembur for some time. Then after marriage, we kind of, my wife and I, we moved to Anand. So, I mean, these names wouldn't make sense to you if you haven't seen Mumbai, but anyone from Mumbai who's listening will know what I'm talking about. And all of these areas have their own little, eccentricity. They have their own charm and characteristics and all of that jazz. So yeah, Mumbai, I mean, it's good. Like most of my friends are here. Like you know how it is. Like in your 30s, most people are like they have family. They've probably traveled to other cities to work. Some are abroad. So there's that. So it's really hard to catch up with most friends. But most of my JJ friends are still here. So it's quite nice. Like so we meet like once a couple of weeks or so, and we hang out. And so like I have friends living close by too. So that's great. So I mean, yeah, Mumbai is always nice, and it's surprising that you mentioned my work like in terms of the city, because like a few years back I had this complaint with my own work that I don't really have that sense of place in my work. Like it wasn't showing. So I was wondering how to bring that whole idea of where I live and the fact that I'm Indian and my Indianness, as they say. I wanted to try and like have that be a part of my work. And I was wondering how to do that, because like I was drawing a lot of, I don't know if because that was because of my influence from the West, or I'm not exactly sure. I wasn't really thinking about it, to be completely honest. So I wasn't, so maybe that was it was supposed to be like a very conscious decision on my part to try and go in that direction. So maybe that's a result of that period of trying. But I still don't exactly know what you mean. Maybe graffiti's wall definitely had the sense of Bombay because it was set here.
Of course.
But apart from that, I don't think. Of course, it all depends. Someone from the USA, if they look at my work, they'll find the Indian, in it. But I don't personally try on my part to add, because it's a very thin line. Like I was discussing this with someone else the other day. Like it's a very thin line to try and make your work belong to a place. It's a very thin line because if not done right, it feels forced.
Of course.
It's a very
there's a skill in making it look not intentional. Like you have to basically design your way around making it more natural. It doesn't
Exactly.
come very intentionally to someone.
Yeah, exactly. So I think there's this element of zoning out where you have to kind of not think about it to be able to get it. You know what I mean?
Okay.
Like if you consciously try, it may not work.
Right.
It's also who's going to be viewing that work, right? So consciously or subconsciously, you also think about your audience, right? Like who's going to be seeing it most. So if it's a book that's going to be released in the US, like you have to know what kind of references you're adding. You have to kind of understand who's going to read. Like, so while drawing graffiti as well, I wasn't like, I knew that most of the audience is going to be American. So I wasn't, so while drawing it, I wasn't aware of it, but subconsciously I did think, Arey, matlab, will some of these references be read the way I want it to be read? Some of these references definitely are only going to be seen by an Indian audience even specifically a Bombay audience, because set in Bombay, in my city. So I knew that those references would only be caught by an audience that is in Mumbai, right? But I think, you don't have to think in specifics that way while drawing.
Right.
But yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that you can see it in my work, because I wasn't consciously trying. Is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, because the fact that you said that Grafiti's Wall was actually intended for an American audience, I actually thought it was the other thing. It was intended for an Indian audience because they will understand the elements that you're going for immediately. But I guess, it's an interesting part where the version of India that Americans or international audiences are exposed to when it comes to India and what we understand about India. So you have to play that line where how much you want to go into that part of India that they're used to, and how much you can bring the newness into the work that's coming out of an Indian project.
Yeah, no, 100%. Like, and there's always pitfalls of like stereotyping a place or like a person, because you know exactly what you're talking about when you say the image that, say, the US or Europe has about India, right? And obviously you don't want to play into it. If you are playing into it, that has to be with intentional, right? It has to be an intentional play, because then you're kind of going for a certain reaction from that audience.
Right.
So there is a use for stereotype as well, because then you can kind of what reaction the audience is going to give you, and then you can play it to your advantage. But at the same time, most times you don't want that stereotype, right? So there's definitely that. But like, speaking of graffiti, it was really funny because even though it was set here, like I don't know if it found the audience here. Like I don't know if the readership was like Indian. Like, even I know there are a lot of people who read it in India, but I'm sure the proportion, like if you think about numbers, like I'm sure we sold way more copies in the US. So that's one thing that I'm wondering how to fix, like especially with projects in the future. Like I would love to have an audience here as well, because I live here, so I wouldn't want to make comics or work or books specifically for an international audience. I would love to have an audience in India. I just don't know how to do that.
But what do you think doesn't I don't know if it's about a connection thing between the project that we do in India for Indians, but what do you think works out better for an American audience? Is because they are more receptive towards graphic novel work and Indians aren't, or that's not a case? Because I'm very alien to the whole graphic novel comic book side of things. So I don't know how the market responds to things. Like the one thing that I'm always seeing Indian youth interested in is basically uh, graphic novels with anime, manga, whatever it is. But is that the only thing that you see the audience receptive towards, or something specific in Indian culture that they would, resonate towards a bit more? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
I don't know, to be completely honest, because I've seen people being very interested in anime. Like I've been to anime conventions in India, and they're like huge. There are lots of people into cosplay. They're into like manga. Like anywhere, whenever I've seen the manga being sold in India, they've been they've been out of stock almost every time. And people are really into all these, like people are into Attack on Titan, Jujutsu Kaisen, and like all the like Chainsaw Man, all these new anime, like totally sold out. Everyone is totally into it. So there's definitely an audience, and even the same can be said for Marvel DC stuff. Like So every time there's a comic convention, these things are sold on. It's like this full house. So there's definitely an audience. I just don't know how. Like I don't know if they'll be receptive to new things.
Right.
So I don't know if it will work. In fact, the only way is to try it. Like the only way is to have a better distribution chain in India. Because right now we don't seem to have that. We don't seem to have like point of sale area.
Right.
Because the only place you can get comics is like your roadside stalls. I don't know if they exist anymore because that's where we used to buy comics.
Of course.
Your railway stalls, your roadside stalls, your bookstores, and obviously bookstores are on the lower, like they're declining, right? So comic book stores, I mean, that the whole concept doesn't really exist. So, I mean, I get it why, because I don't think it's a business that will do well. So I'm not sure how to fix that. I think the best way to do is to kind of, and I've discussed with some of my peers who are into comics, but maybe have like like places where we can store the books, like print the books and store the books, and maybe have a third party involved with who takes care of the publishing. And then maybe find ways of distributing it. And the point of sale is the challenge here. But maybe Amazon can take care of that. So and we can use the digital media you can use the internet to your advantage, maybe. But maybe that's the solution. I don't know yet.
So also like thinking in terms of international publishers, okay, like for example, Image Comics and all, DC, Marvel. What does an Indian team like? Do they have any strengths that they can use where they can pitch something that actually will be very like highly receptive for publishers like Image Comics? And like does the Indian storytelling methods, do they actually resonate with these bigger international publishers on any level?
From what I've seen, if it's a good story, it will work out. Is what I've seen, because the readership is definitely there, and they're quite excited to check out new things. And I think like a new structure in storytelling will definitely work, because I mean, like for example, Ram is spearheading a series of series of stories under the title of The Vigil, right? That's with DC. So Jessica Chen is the editor on that. So I've been doing a series of covers for that for that project. So I just finished 3. I have 3 more to go. But yeah, so that's The Vigil is basically a group of Indian heroes. I mean, and kind of anti-heroes. They're not conventional heroes, but they are basically set in India. And Jessica is helping to bring up this whole imprint called We Are Legend. It's basically like a South Asian, Asian and South Asian set of heroes and creators. So DC is definitely looking into that. I don't know if Marvel is. I'm sure there are in some ways or other. But yeah, I mean, they're definitely aware of the leadership, and they're definitely aware of the fact that there aren't enough Desis and South Asians involved in the comics industry. And everyone wants to see more of their own. I mean, those representation is very like debatable, but at the same time, yeah, it'd be nice to have more Indian stuff out there in the mainstream.
Right.
So so there's definitely those projects coming up, and there are definitely creators from India who are working on these projects. So there's that, and we also have independent work. Both in animation and in comics, that has an international audience.
Of course,
it's just that we have to do more of it, like tenfold, to be able to really be on the map. So I have this fantasy of having what anime is for Japan, having that whole ecosystem here in India would be amazing. I mean, I don't know if we are ready for it, and I don't know if we have the right kind of like cultural and social setting for it. Because I mean, Japan is the right place for it, because I mean, the film industry is made a certain way, and people consume media in a certain way there, right? So graphic novels and comics and manga is always a part of. I mean, for a very long time, it's part of their life. Even adults read manga on a regular basis. So it's just it's the default way of consuming media, right? Apart from film. So in India, we don't have that, but we had that at some point, right? If you remember, like Tinkle and Champak and all this. I mean, Tinkle's still around, but I don't think it has the same leadership that it had like 15 years back.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, like it was everywhere. Yeah. Like no train journey was complete without Tinkle.
Right. Every time a train stops at some station, you will find at least one small book stall outside where you can pick up on some of the comics.
Yeah.
But also I feel because seeing the political scenario, like a lot of eyes have started turning towards India and South Asian countries, because I think like on certain levels, economically and all, we're doing fairly well. So if that's bringing some eyes towards the subcontinent, and also what anime and manga did for Japan, I think it makes sense to look into what made it, explode over there as well, because India is like not a country. India is essentially a continent.
Exactly.
With multiple countries, and every state has its own way of looking at things. So finding that one big overarching mass audience with one kind of project is a tricky thing to do. So like even recently, you and we also worked on one project where the focus was to create something very Indian. But then again, the conversation becomes around, okay, what constitutes as Indian, right?
That's exactly
what direction we take with it.
That's exactly what I meant when I was talking about it, because like the moment you consciously sit down and ask yourself, what do you mean by Indian?
Yeah.
Right. And like you said, India, I mean, as a country, there are so many cultural influences on the fact that it's basically a set of different values and cultures and languages and even religiosities coming together. It's just really hard to put it under one umbrella. And then you would have to ask, like, what is Indian, right? You would have to really get into it. And then even if you do, and if you try and put that in a medium, it just feels too forced. If you push it in that direction, that's what I didn't want, because I didn't want it to. I mean, if a story is set in India, is that itself has its own. That's the simplest way of doing it, right? But that's one thing that I'm trying to do with my own project. Like, I'm trying not to think about it. At the same time, it is set in a area, in a location that is reminiscent of India. It's not exactly India, but it has the whole. It feels like the kind of setup that, it's very natural to me to draw in that setting. So I'm trying to be the most me, in a way that I'm drawing things that are familiar to me. I'm drawing things that are appealing to me as just a person. And then hopefully, if it translates to looking Indian or not, I'm not really concerned about that at this point. Right. So I guess that's one way of doing it. But I feel like the problem with trying to be Indian, trying to make the medium too Indian, then people tend to go into things like mythology and history and all of that. And then, then there's the ideas of patriotism and jingoism and all of that jazz that then you go into that, and that is a little bit of a tricky sphere that I don't know if I want to touch that. So that's so it's a so my way of dealing with it is not to deal with it at all. Just tell an honest story, a story that works and is appealing to an audience. Is appealing to you more than anything else. Audience तो बाद में देख लेंगे, but it has to work as a story. It has to be interesting, and if it's set in India, if it's familiar to the artist, as in me in this case, then I guess it will come on its own, and I wouldn't have to think about it. And that's just how I'm trying to go about it.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, because also I think as like Indian youth, even if a lot of people do not want to be political by nature, I feel Indians are quite political. Like they like having a set of principles that they'll fight for with their lives, right? So everyone's always trying to defend their strong thoughts about a certain government that we have, certain laws that we have, and every state has their own version of it. Like I've seen people being more aggressive in West Bengal. Certain states will not have that level of aggression, but they'll have certain principles that they'll think of. So those things ought to play into it. So like having a story, because the thing that has been marketed outside India as what is Indian is the Bollywood side of things. And now in the past few years, we have seen that kind of, getting reserved down to something that we don't really exactly connect to any longer. Because, there's been a lot more content that has been coming out over the last 2 years. People have started seeing different kinds of stories. More focus has come on side characters more than your, traditional Bollywood actor or actress. So that whole stereotype of Bollywood is the most authentic representation of India, that again fights with the political representation of India as well. So I think a lot of projects, I don't know, maybe could work if there was a political bent to it, but it really depends on who you're doing for. Like a lot of films that from the South which work out are basically films which are catered towards people from the South, right?
Correct.
So that, and as they start talking about it, the voices, they kind of, echo more and more throughout the country. So there are ways to do that. But you spoke about writing, and I know that you've been working on your own stories at this point. So how has the writing process been for you? Because I guess you've been having experience, right, like working with a lot of people as illustrator, but you also did a lot of, understanding and rewriting scripts and figuring out the stories. So working on your own project where illustration and the drawing part comes much later, is just focusing on the writing. How have you been approaching that at this point?
Like so far, because the deadlines that I've been using have been completely self-imposed, right? Because the project right now is not commercial.
Right.
So it's just something I've been doing on the side. So I've been for like last year, I finished a DC gig in March, I think. And since then, I have tried to put in an hour and a half every day for like a year. So I have been constant. I've been doing this consistently, but at the same time, it's hard in a way. Like drawing is not. You know what I mean? Like it's a very different challenge from what it was like when I was learning to draw. Because learning to draw is very linear as compared, because you have a certain set of skills. You have to master those skills by repetition. You have to keep doing them. You have to understand like how the body works, how perspective works, and it's quite scientific, right?
Okay.
But I feel like writing beyond a point, and because it's not conventional writing, because I'm not dealing with language, and I'm not worried about the language of it. Like I don't really care how the language works. I'm just worried about the structure of the story at this point. So for me, the writing itself is more ideas and more the structure as compared to the language portion of it, which I'm sure like. And so the way I initially when I started, and I was very aware of the fact that I wanted to write. So I sat down to do it, and there was this giant mental block because I kept telling something in the back of my head kept telling me, "Arey, bro, you're doing a new thing, and you're an artist. You're not a writer.
Oh wow! Okay.
How are you going to learn a whole new skill at this point? Like, this was the constant conversation that I was having with myself, and it got to a point where I just couldn't function.
So that was like an insecurity that creeped in because you have not done this.
Yeah, it was an insecurity. It was also the fact that I just don't know anything about it. I haven't written before. The only time I'd written was a short story for my own anthology, and that was just very small as compared to this. So it kept bugging me, and then there's a point where I was like, you know what, fuck this, I'm gonna step out, and I started doing. I was doing these walks, like I was doing this art walks every day, because I finally had some time to breathe, and I wasn't on like urgent deadlines, so I was able to take some time out, go walk. And my home has these alleyways; they're very green, they're nice. So I started walking. So I was doing these walks, and I was getting these ideas. I had these ideas, and I was able to it organically kept growing from there. So you know what? So I took my earphones out, put them on, and I was like, you know what? Let's start recording. And I started recording these things. So I started narrating to myself what the story was, and I kept going like that. And then eventually, I kind of had the structure like on voice, and it wasn't literally sitting down writing. So what that did was I took out the whole act of writing itself, and then I had the story on video, like on audio, in the form of audio form, and in the form of audio files, and then I just had to transcribe them. And then the transcription itself is just basically mechanical work, right? So there's no point where I'm sitting down and this is the thought, I'm doing the writing, So I'm not, never am I sitting down and telling myself, oh, I am writing at this point. And so I don't do that. I don't sit down and write. I go out and narrate and I take notes on my phone, and then I sit in a cafe and transcribe. So so I don't have to sit in my right now at this desk, which is my art desk, and which in my brain is the desk where I draw. I don't sit on that desk and write, because then I just can't. My brain just can't. I need to compartmentalize. Yeah, I need that space to be my art space. So it's a whole different. So luckily, what has kind of worked for me is that have two different spaces, both in my head and in like literal space, two different spaces for writing and for drawing, so that those things don't get mixed up. And I've noticed that every time I sit down on my computer and try to write, I just get distracted. I go to YouTube or this or that. I want to draw something, and I just completely grab my sketchbook and start drawing. And I'm just not able to.
So do you think that preparation of sitting and writing immediately breaks your flow of thinking as well? Like your thought process while thinking about the story is very different from the thought process when you're prepared to sit and type down a draft of it.
Yeah, that too. And also, like, because I come from that school of drawing where you have to draw like 8 hours a day. You have to put in your 10,000 hours. I come from that school, like draw every moment, every free minute. I come from that. So every time I'm in a cafe waiting for someone, every time in wherever, like at a doctor's sitting and waiting, I have my sketchbook. I start drawing, and if I don't, I'll be like, I'm wasting time. So for me, it's that like I have to draw a minimum 4 hours a day. So if I'm on my desk, that starts to bug me. Like, oh, you're writing, you're not drawing, you're wasting time. So obviously, it's a very dated idea, and I don't subscribe to it. But it's memory at this point. It's like if I'm not doing anything, I have to. Even when I'm sitting with friends, it's a very annoying habit. My good friends know this now, and they're okay with it. But if I'm with like people who don't know me that well, they'll be like, like, why are you drawing? And I'm sure I've been very awkward. Like I did this at my wedding, dude. At proper wedding,
really?
Yeah, I mean, not exactly the wedding, but the social gatherings that you have before and after the wedding, right? And I was drawing on my sketchbook, and then people later were complaining. They told my people from my family, "Hey, matlab kya tha? Where did you drawing?" So I've had very awkward situations because I can't sit down. I just sit and talk. I need to be doing something in my hand, especially drawing. So it's just a thing that I've trained my brain to think, oh, you have to be drawing constantly. So, and that happens when I'm sitting and typing.
Right.
Because my brain is just like, kya kar raha, So I need to be able to break from that. I had to kind of shift to a different physical space. So that's why I prefer to narrate when I'm out walking or and I think I heard Chuck Palahniuk talk about it, that he does a lot of his writing like that. I think he does a lot of his writing by narration, and then he doesn't really sit and write. It's just a matter of transcribing what you already recorded. Right? So it breaks down the process, and there's no block there. So I mean, again, like I'm not a writer, so I don't know what is right and what is wrong, but this has worked so far for me. Like I'm only just starting out. Like, it's been a year that I've dedicated this project, and I haven't really talked about this anywhere. This is the first time I'm talking about this, because I've been fairly secretive about it. I haven't really put out any of the work, the drawings that I've done for it, and I haven't really put out any content. But yeah, I mean, if you remember, like we had this conversation, you and I had this conversation in Bangalore, where we discussed how putting things out on social media kind of ruins the big dopamine moment. You know what I mean? Like when you finally finish a project and you kind of, because you're putting it out, you kind of get that dopamine fix. So you don't get that urge to keep working on the project, and it kind of
the premature preaching of your own
creative
project really takes down that energy that you can put in.
Yeah, I think you had said that, and that kind of stuck with me, and I was like, you know what, he's right. Yeah. Constantly putting things out, it kind of fizzles out by the end. Like, so your project kind of, especially if you don't have imposed deadlines. And maybe this is the reason why, like, I've made a lot of progress, but at the same time, since I've been producing work commercially also to make my, to sustain my lifestyle. it's hard to devote time to. I think my plan is to start working full time on it from June or July. I think before that I should have the script ready. But yeah, so it's coming along. It's coming.
Wow,
Hopefully, I can give it more time. Yeah. And like I said, I don't know if any of this is right or wrong what I'm doing, but I think it's working for me, so I'm going to keep at it.
But I don't honestly think so even today I was just talking to a couple of friends about this book that I've been reading called The Creative Act by Rick Rubin. And he basically kind of distills down upon like the creative process. And my understanding from that is that there is no subtractive process over here. Like every step and every misstep, adds to something else. It's just like knowing what not to do gives you an idea of what 100 other things that you can try. So of course, I'm pretty sure your process is also very legitimate. But I want to know, like, even when you're thinking about the story, right? Like, how do you, like, even when you're narrating it to yourself? So when you start off, do you have basically, I mean, what's your approach as to how connecting dots in the story? Like, do you know the exact beats as the story would take, and then you take a beat and you kind of find connecting points with the previous and the forthcoming beat? Like how that process is for you? Like, how do you approach that?
For me, I started with just notes.
Okay.
Like just listing down, because I had a lot of time before I started actually writing, right? Because I'll just go back to like what exactly I'm talking about. So this project was Chavi. It's called Chavi, and I've had this was my college project essentially. So we're talking about 2010 or 11.
I think I've even seen illustrations for this project, like on your Behance.
It's been on Behance for years,
right.
And that was like my college project.
Right.
So I've had the basic idea for it since then. So the idea was that like there's a key maker, and the key maker gets very unwillingly involved in this anti-establishment movement. And he gets forced into it, and then eventually gets so involved that eventually it causes death. So basically, that's the idea. That's a very simple idea. It's a picture book essentially. So I had like 24 illustrations with like just one-liners on the left, drawings on the right, one-liners on the left, and it read like a little story.
Interesting.
And and it was very gritty, and it was influenced by so many different artists that I was looking at the time. And I was young, and if I look, I would cringe very hard and look back at the stuff. But that was the idea, and I couldn't really, for some reason, I just couldn't get over it. So it just sat in my head for all these years, and I didn't really do anything for it. Just sat there. But every time I found something interesting, I would note it down. Like I had a Google Docs folder with just points, just notes. This setup or this kind of lighting could work, or this technology, just notes. And this did this for like a while. And even while I was working on other projects, when I was drawing comics that were written by other writers, I was constantly getting ideas, and I just kept noting it down into this folder. And eventually it kept growing. And there's some structure that kept forming through this time. And when I started actually thinking about it, I already had like a skeleton ready there. I just had to put it into like a format. And things I'm not exactly sure how, I'm not sure if I can talk about it, but yeah, I mean, when I had this idea, and then I had another idea as well, where I was discussing like internet relationships. So that was the second idea. And essentially what happened when I was doing the walking and writing and narrating to myself, I was able to kind of try and bring those two ideas together. So that was the moment when I went like, oh shit, you know what? Maybe I can bring this project together and maybe mash these ideas, and maybe something new will come out. So at that point, I was just trying to think of a cool idea where I could put out all these ideas that I had, put out like the drawing style that I had in mind, and produce something cool at the same time. But I think now it's become a bigger thing in my head. So it's been a very organic process. Like I didn't have anything in mind, and I had two very disparate ideas, and they somehow found some parallels between those two ideas, and I was able to kind of match them up, kind of almost force them together and kind of force to fit. So and once I had that break, then things started to fall into place.
Do you think
I didn't even know that I wanted to make a comic book from it. I just knew that it was a story.
Okay.
And then it kind of, because because I've been working in comics, my brain kind of works in that way, like
in that visual language.
pages, right?
So when you even thinking about the story, do you see them as panels, one out like after the other? Like that's how you're visualizing the story?
Sometimes I do, yeah. Sometimes I do. It just helps because I know that it's going to take that format. It's going to be out of that medium. I know that, okay, so this will look cool in a close up, or this will be like a nice establishing shot or whatever, like spread out. You know what I mean, like the lingo. But that's how things are kind of now turning up in my head. But yeah, but otherwise, like when I first started thinking about that, I didn't really have any idea at all.
Right. So like I feel a lot of writers, they avoid like something that I refer to as the breaking the once upon a time start of a story. Like it's too vague a start for stories mostly. Like so everyone, like most books nowadays that we read, they start from a very specific action oriented thing that's happening. So even with comic books, like you can either have an establishing shot, which is like a bigger larger scale painting, but it could also be very specific to a character. So which brings me to the idea of narrative flow. Like how do you conceptualize narrative flow in comic books? Because you can go the traditional panel by panel, but it's also about leading your eye through a page. So how does that process work for an illustrator? How do you plan that out?
The answer honestly is like a very boring one, because most people, because there's a big team involved in comics, like you can't just produce a page and send it to the editor, right? Because then they'll be like, "Arey, matlab, this is not working with the page. Then you would have to rework the whole thing." So generally, there's like a whole pre-production process there. So you do thumbnails first, and you generally do thumbnails for the whole issue, just to see how the story flows, or you do thumbnails for like first 10 pages, or you do thumbnails for first 5 pages. Depends on what works for you and the writer and the editor the best, right? So you do thumbnails with very rough 2x3 quick sketches of the whole sketch of the whole page, where you decide the composition, you decide how the characters are acting, and big picture stuff, like nothing specific. Like you don't go into expression and stuff. You just figure out the big picture stuff, like the composition, the flow, the layout, the story, how the story reads, how the big beats of the process story progress, etc. And then you have a feedback session with the writer, the editor, whatever. See how it works. If there's going to be changes, you make those changes, and then you sound it back to your editor, and you go from there. So there's no point where you send them a finished product and be like, "Hey, okay." It's never that. And then even the letterer is involved in the process, where they'll be able to see, they'll know where the lettering will come, or where the speech bubbles will come, etc. So it's a very organic process.
Right. Even with the letterers, like, do they come after the thumbnails are done and then they'll figure out the layout as to how it work, or it's like a collaborative process while you're even working on the thumbnails?
So far, like, I haven't worked with a letterer at the thumbnail stage, but I will draw like a very rough lettering format for the page as well.
Sometimes, for example, if you're working with Aditya, so like by what stage of the process does he start, contributing?
Usually the penciling stage.
Okay.
Usually the penciling stage, when he'll get involved and he'll start roughing it out, roughing his process out, and see the layout, because a lot of the narrative control also sits with the letterer, because how the audience reads the page also depends on how the bubbles are placed, how the dialogue boxes are placed. So obviously you read left to right in Western comics. You also read top to bottom, right? So you can mess about a little bit. If people are having an argument, you can kind of, people are having you can mess about with that a little bit. You can mess about with the shape of the panel. You can mess out with the shape of the dialogue box. So there's a lot you can do. And so it helps if the letterer is involved at that stage already. And if as an artist, I have an idea of how the lettering should work, I will have suggestions on it as well. Or usually I don't, because I think BD is way more educated in this than I am. So I've let him make his decisions. And so Usually Ram or any other writer generally has some feedback on the lettering. So it's a very essentially it's a very collaborative process.
Right.
A lot of to and fro. Yeah.
So for the projects that you have already worked on, like Blue and Green, Graffitis Wall, what are the kind of stories that you see yourself resonating towards more? Like what, like do you like a high concept story or something which is more, you know, specific or simpler but more, you know, emotionally distilled towards a human being? Like what kind of stories, what kind of scale, you know, resonates with you as a creator? Because the stuff that you've done till now is very intimate by its nature, right? It's not always a very big story. It focuses on one person mostly, and then their journey. So like what are the kind of stories, like what is your point of view, what is your creative take for graphic novel that sets you apart than the other traditional graphic novel stuff that we see coming out?
So, I mean, yeah, I think I'd agree to the fact that I definitely need the project to have some kind of personal relationship with me. And if I don't have that at the get-go, I should be able to develop it at least mid by the time I've started drawing it, because a graphic novel is a commitment for a long time, right? Especially if it's a one shot. It's like you're working on it for minimum a year. So you need to have some kind of intimate relationship with the characters if you're going to be drawing it. For example, Eric Dieter, who was a jazz musician who had drew for Blue and Green, right? Like a lot of the references are my own self posing in front of the camera and taking pictures. So essentially, you're drawing yourself. So you can't help but see yourself in the character because you're technically drawing yourself. Right? And also, also depends on the story, because Blue and Green is about the artist struggle, right? So and everyone, all of us, like everyone in the creative field, or everyone has that sense of struggle, right? And I kind of went through a similar phase when I was drawing the book too. So it was a lot of the issues that the character was facing. I kind of could see those things in my life as well. So even though it's like a Black American person and I'm sitting in India, I think I saw that in a review somewhere. Like, oh, two Indian sounding names. What do they know about, Black America or jazz? So I was like, I mean, in a way, yeah, it makes sense. What would we know? I mean, I've never even like had an intimate like a conversation with a Black American person. So what would I know about their struggles, right? But at the same time, it's essentially a human story. I mean, a lot of the things. I mean, technically we are living the same lives, right? If you think about it, on the most basic level.
Of course.
So yeah, I mean, there's it's an argument to be had, but yeah, I think you'd need to have a personal connection, some kind of personal connection with the characters. So I do definitely prefer to have if there's a choice between like a high, like a, what do you call it, like a drawing a whole world, and like a, I don't know how to explain this, because the most good stories come from a place where you still need to have a connection with the character. I mean, I don't think there is even if it's high concept science fiction, whatever. You do need the connection between characters, and the audience does have to, even if it's like a Star Wars, you need a Luke Skywalker there, right, to be able to relate to the audience. So I mean, kitna bhi high concept kar lo, you still need a personal connection.
You'll need a hero's journey concept towards it. Is it?
Yeah, not just anyone. Like it needs to have some kind of, you need a hook, right? Even it doesn't even have to be a human being. It can be a dog. It can be an alien. It can be like anything. But it needs
can you make a non-living object a hook for a story?
I think you can. I think you can. I mean, it would depend. It would depend. But I think we as humans tend to anthropomorphize anything. I think we can see. I think we can project our own ideas and emotions onto things, and which is the concept of Kuntam essentially, right? So that's exactly what Kuntam is, because it doesn't really have a story of its own. It doesn't really have any canon of its own. It's just an object where the audience, anyone who's holding a Kuntam, can can project their own
Right.
ideas onto it, and it becomes its own entity then.
Right.
And that's the whole idea about it, which is why I wanted that. I find that idea very interesting that people can do that. So I think yeah, you can do a non-living. Kuntham is a non-living object.
Right.
I thought of Kuntham in a way where it's sort of living.
Right.
So it moves, but if you cut it and you put it back together, it'll still move. You know what I
Right.
mean? So it's not living and breathing in the conventional sense. Like it doesn't have a circulation system. It doesn't have a. It could, depending on
Right.
what you want. So
Right.
it's like that. It's extremely subjective. So
Right.
so in a way, it's a bit too subjective. I understand that, but at the same time, I want it to be. I want people to be able to like force any kind of idea onto it, and
Right.
it would still work.
It's interesting because I think our inherent and incessant need to find meaning out of everything and not letting anything be just by its own serves the storytelling need as well. Like any non-living object would suddenly not remain just an object, but it will become a metaphor.
Yeah,
Essentially,
exactly,
you
exactly.
start to associate a certain principle, a certain philosophy around the thing. Like headphones are not headphones just like that anymore. So like even
Exactly.
if the subject of a story is something non-living, we'll have to look at it in relation to human beings and how it's being passed around. How at one point is it getting rejected? So is that the death of the object at that point? And what does that mean to the people who have been taking care of it? So I think as you said, anthropomorphizing these things, we see it a lot more in films as well. Because
Wilson from Castaway comes to mind.
right,
That like
exactly.
I felt bad when he loses it. Like it's
Right,
just a football,
right,
but the fact that it stays with him for that one. But so the idea is that we can do that as people, and the fact that you use that
right,
and use the fact that people can do that in a story and
right.
try and manipulate people's desires to see human emotions project onto the objects. I think that's very like smart.
Mm,
And you're right. Like it totally makes sense.
right.
And we
Since
are pattern seeking animals, right? In the end.
absolutely, absolutely. Since you already brought up Kuntam, I wanted to talk about Kuntam as well because like on just figuring out what all other things that I want to talk to you about. I also realized you have developed Kuntam a lot more since the last time we spoke about Kuntam, where it's not just a project like a design art project anymore. It has started creating its own lore around it. So if you want to take me through like how Kuntam came into existence, what were the initial thoughts about it? What was that?
So back when I was drawing graffiti's wall,
Mhm.
I was asked to come to NID for a short period, like just
Right.
as a guest lecturer kind of thing. So it was just like I was doing like a 2 week thing. I was just teaching like foundations to like a
Mhm.
bunch of students, like very young students, first year uh, undergrad, I think. Undergrad, post, I'm not 100% sure, but I was there sitting uh, in the campus for a week, right? And I was staying in the guest house.
Right.
And I think what happened is that over the weekend my health was a bit down. I think the weather in Ahmedabad like, was very unpredictable, especially for
Right.
a person from Mumbai. So over the weekend I fell under the weather and I wasn't able to go out and I wasn't able to socialize with people.
Mhm.
So I had this book, I had a sketchbook, and the internet was choppy, so I couldn't really watch anything either. So I started sketching, and I'm not the kind of person who doodles a lot. Like I need to have a certain idea in mind or something or the other. But at this point in time, and I do this a lot now, like where I just start drawing without any thoughts in mind. But I wasn't the kind of person back then in
Right.
2016, 17. Like, so this point in time, I just started sketching, and my brain was fevered, and I don't know what I was thinking, but I started drawing, and I started seeing these shapes recurring, and I
Mhm.
kept drawing them, and I filled like 3 sheets full of just these shapes,
Right.
and it's very interesting. Like, I mean, I don't know exactly what I mean. Not the kind, like I said, I wasn't the kind of person who just drew things for
Mhm.
the fuck of it. I need to have intent when I'm drawing. But
Right.
at that point, I didn't have any intent, and that was interesting to me in itself because I'm not that kind of person, and I was doing something that is so not doesn't fit in my idea of myself.
Right.
So already it was interesting to me because I'm drawing something that doesn't really mean anything. It doesn't really look like anything. So I started drawing. I started drawing a lot of it, and I kept continuing even after back when I started working. Back when I was got back to my daily routine, I kept doing that, and I saw for some forms kept repeating themselves. And I'm like, you know what? Maybe I can do this because I haven't seen these anywhere else.
Right.
And I sort of gave it the name of Kuntham because Kuntham basically in Malayalam essentially means a stand-in term for something that doesn't have a name.
Right.
Kuntham is also like it also means like a long pole.
Okay.
But in slang, in everyday slang, it also means just anything. What is that thingy?
Something which is not defined exactly.
Yeah, when we say thingy.
Yeah.
Doesn't really mean, right? So, and my mom used to use it a lot. I mean, basically, Mallus use it a lot. So I kept hearing it from my mom a lot. And it was a very interesting word because it doesn't really mean anything itself, right?
Right. It's like a thingamajig.
Thingamajig, exactly that. So, thingamajig, thingy, aisa. So I had that in mind and I showed it to my mom and she was like, this looks like a Kuntham. So we kept from there. We went from there. At that time, Floating Canvas got in touch. They were like, oh, you know what? We would like to do something in 3D. And I was like, 3D is always something that I was very interested in. So, maybe we can collaborate. And then we thought of this and I did a few more 100 designs, like just drawings. And then we kind of broke it down and had a couple of designs that I was really interested in. And then this whole idea of Kuntham Collectible kind of came about. And it's been a really long time. And honestly, it's going very slowly. But the first edition came out a couple of years back. I think. Years ho gaya hoga, I think. COVID ke time. So, came out then and we've almost sold out the whole series, the whole lot. Yeah. And it's been good. So the whole idea was that it's going to be a series. So I think my idea at this point is that Kunthams are stackable. Okay. So the second one that comes out would have to be stacked on top of the first one, and it would form like a totem pole of Kunthams.
Interesting.
And there's this feeling of satisfaction that we get from stacking things, right? We love to stack.
Right.
So I just thought stacking these objects would be cool and building them, designing them so that they're able to stack and be independently available and they'll stand them independently as well and be able to stack it on top of each other would be cool. So I thought that's the current idea. I may change it, may not. It's totally depends on my mood. But yeah, like that's the idea for now. So that's one section of it. That's Kuntham Collectibles. I will also be developing this other section of the Kuntham project. It's called the Kuntham Collector series, and that series is basically just single images. So basically, I take the focus from the object itself and turn it to the collector of Kuntham. So what kind of person would collect Kuntham, right? So I thought, I would be. So my first instinct was that kind of person who would collect a Kuntham would be deranged, would be completely like in fact almost looked down upon. So I wanted to play up this idea of it's almost insulting to collect Kunthams. It's like chewing and spitting pan. You don't really look down upon that, right? Or an alcoholic or someone who is a hoarder, right? It's a debilitating like an obsession to do these things, right? So collecting Kunthams is something like that. I wanted to draw that parallel. So I've been drawing this series of called Kuntham Collector for a while. I'm just bunch of different mediums and different whatever the fuck I wanted to do. So that's Kuntham Collector. And then there's another whole section of Kuntham that I wanted to play was it's called Anxieties of the K. It's an anthology of short stories. So here I involve other people. I just basically give a Kuntham to people I admire and ask them to tell a story with that. So a bunch of different graphic novelists and storytellers from India are involved in this. They'll be developing stories, and eventually I hope to put it all together into an anthology, maybe a series of comic books or whatever. We haven't decided exactly what. But yeah, it's really amazing to see the kind of stories that people have come up with. And yes, I've been rambling on about this for a while. Like I'm sure I'm bored. Everyone is listening.
No, but I think.
But yeah, it's an exciting project for me, especially because. So one reason also why it came about is because in comics, I'm a slave to the script, right? As the artist, like the written word always comes before the art.
Mm-hmm.
And beyond a point, I was like, you know what, I want to change this up a little bit. So that is one reason why I started Kuntam, is because the image comes first.
Right.
Like the written word is whatever the fuck you want it to be, it doesn't matter.
Right.
So that's after. So you first draw the image and then you can make up whatever story you want. So it was kind of a reaction to how I generally work as an illustrator. And I always follow whatever the written script is, or the description, or the theme is, or whatever it is, right? The written word essentially.
Right.
So yeah, that's all of this, the whole project. I mean, I finally been able to explain this.
You know, that's interesting, because like whenever I have looked at images for this project or the collectibles, it's almost like you look at it, but then you start thinking about what is your reaction to it. And if you're looking at it with other people, you look at each other and see what they think. So it's almost like this project which has a very divergent focus. It's like it's like a negative space in the middle, and you are just looking at everything around that whole space. So I think that really plays very interesting into the whole idea of a non-living focal point, but it also becomes a metaphor, essentially.
That's exactly what my intent was with this.
Yeah.
And not having a description, not having a defining idea for an object or a character, it sounds almost lazy, but I want to do so much work around it that it doesn't seem lazy anymore, if it makes sense. You know what I mean?
It's funny you think it's lazy, because when I was thinking, like, if as an artist and a creator, if I had to create something which is not specifically focused towards achieving a point, I see it as a very anxiety provoking project, because I can't really make the case or defend this subject.
Why does it exist, right?
Why does it even exist, right? So like,
I know what you mean.
So that brings a different conversation as to how it's even like perceived.
100%. So I get this thought constantly, like why does Kuntam or any other project that I've been doing have to exist at all, right? But then that's all of art, right? In the end, it's all of art is kind of vain in the end.
Of course.
But at the same time, we do need to produce, we do need to create. So I mean, I've thought about that a lot, especially during early years, like just out of college. I used to be constantly thinking about the fact that, I'm not a scientist, I'm not a doctor, I'm not an engineer, I'm not saving lives. My work isn't really important, right? If I die tomorrow, I mean, obviously, anyone dies, the world is still going to go on. But the idea is that no one is really impacted with my work.
Right.
But at the same time, I read this somewhere, and that really resonated. Someone said, you don't really think about art until something tragic has happened to you. And then you kind of attached yourself to like a film or a song. And then it just becomes your whole center of being, that bit of art. And then you start to denote that much, like that much of your life too. And at that point, I mean, eventually that feeling is gone away. Now I don't really think about it at all. I don't care if it's important or not at this point. I don't care if it has to exist or not. Maybe it doesn't, maybe it does. Who cares? Like still going to produce. That's my thinking now. So it's I don't know if it's evolved or devolved or whatever, but I don't think there's a point of thinking whether something needs to exist or not. It's just let other people have that discussion while you're producing, right?
But it's interesting how the conversation around art has evolved at this point, because of so many things that's happening in the world right now in terms of technological developments. People have started like
you're going to bring up AI, aren't you?
I don't want to get into the conversation, but like I'll circle around, because I feel like AI becomes a very exhaustive conversation.
It's also repetitive now. Like
it's very repetitive.
We've all had that discussion.
And it's not a black and white conversation at all.
Exactly.
It's a very gray
and there's no solution to it either. Like
there's no solution. It's very context oriented. It depends on the kind of thing that's serving. So it doesn't make sense. But my idea is that, like, do you subject to how people, like, do you subject yourself to thinking the way people think about art at this point? Like how, like if art is looked at as a non-essential industry. Like there was this whole situation that was going on like during the COVID era. Someone put out an article about top 5 non-essential jobs, and art was one of them.
I've seen that
And
one.
it was done in a
I've seen that
graphic
one.
design way, and everyone was laughing that
Yeah,
you
yeah,
literally
yeah.
required to hire an artist to make that. So like I find the conversation around what is art like very interesting. So like what has your take been on that front? Like how do you see how art serves you personally?
To me, it's just, I mean, it's hard to think of myself as an artist, right? Like, I, I don't, honestly, I don't like, for simply just for technical reasons, I would uh, call myself an artist just for convenience. Just it communicates a certain thing. I do this for a living. I make art for a living, so I'm an artist, right?
Right.
But then, if you think about it, like, I mean, I have a few things in my head that I have to produce. Like, there's no way I will not be able to not. I will not be able not to. Like, if there's a time, how do I even put this? So sometimes I do this, right? I fantasize about this the context is the same, the idea is the same, but I think of, say, The Last of Us was a reality,
Right.
or we are in some kind of apocalypse where only the essentials survived. Everything else, no frivolities,
Are we not in apocalypse?
no frills. Well, that's debatable, but the idea is that you've seen The Last of Us, right? Any apocalypse film or series, right? You take away all the frills, basically. You take away everything, just the essentials. Would art still exist, or would, I mean, you like I said, it's not a simple like a monolithic thing. Art is not one thing. Art, I mean, even Netflix you watch, or everything is art, right? Think about it. But people still need to get away from their daily life, right? You need something. You need stand-up comedy. You need music. You need something. Otherwise, like, what is the whole? I mean, I don't want to sound philosophical, but at the same time, like, even if that happened, I think there'll still be some guy telling stories. You know what I mean?
Of course.
That is still art. So I think we humans need that. Like, there's some study that I was listening to that said that our ability to tell stories basically shaped how we evolved as humans.
Yeah.
Like we hadn't. I mean, the way we diverged from our common ancestors, right? Neanderthals and humans and stuff. Even Neanderthals told stories apparently. Even they had rituals, and even they had pieces of art. Like some sites we've dug up, we found like pieces of art, even at Neanderthal settlements. So the fact that our closest cousins, like historically, were able to create art, right? So it's part of us as humans. So even if you take away all the frills, I think there'll still be storytelling. There'll still be some form of art. I don't think it's possible for us to take that away. So the fact that cavemen did that, those hands, right, on the caves. I mean, the closest you can come to no frills is that, right? You have to go and hunt. So,
right.
I mean, I'm trying to not be philosophical here. The idea is,
but I also feel like I don't think we can have a conversation around art without being philosophical about it, because if we become too subjective and too quantitative with it, so because that again brings question towards how art is even taught. Like you have schools where there is a grading system, right? So are you grading, like if you're saying that someone like has scored lower on an assignment, so are you saying that they aren't an artist, but they did create something, right? Okay, on a technical level, maybe it did not suffice for you, but then again, like you can't really quantify what is art. You can probably have like gatekeepers, and they'll tell you, like teachers or like art directors will tell you, okay, this is not good art, like this requires a certain sophisticated taste. But telling someone that like what you do is not art, like are we even capable of having that sort of a judgment, right?
I mean, you wouldn't have that conversation essentially, but I do think we need some kind of objectivity, especially in schools,
of course,
in art schools. And I come from JJ, right? I've studied at JJ, and the biggest issue with JJ was that I feel like it's not up to date. Like it's the curriculum was from way back when the school started, and the teachers basically treat it like any other government institution. So I mean, there isn't really an exchange of ideas. There isn't really
when you say being up to date, what do you mean? Like, what does
taught.
it need to incorporate at this point in order for it to be updated? Because I look at like the core foundational education to be very similar across the field. So what do you think should be incorporated in further?
So, for example, JJ's curriculum is aimed at advertising.
Okay.
So anyone who graduates from JJ is ready to get into the advertising market, get into the industry, the advertising industry.
Okay.
Is ready to get into, at the entry level, get into an agency, advertising agency. But no other industry.
I see. Okay.
Which creates a huge issue, especially for illustrators and for entertainment design, animators, etc. Because there have been people who've gotten into all these fields but they've had to have had those extra steps to be able to train themselves and get into those industries. But the fact that is still the curriculum in JJ is a little bit outdated for me.
Okay.
I mean, for people like me who have no interest in advertising, I mean, I have worked for advertising as an industry, worked for like a year, but I didn't really have any interest in it, so I had to kind of make my way out of it. But that's definitely an outdated idea. We don't have guest lecturers in JJ. We don't really interact with any of the outside world.
Okay.
The assignments are still hand drawn, which is definitely outdated. I mean, I kind of benefited from that for sure, because like it helps to build your skill. But it would have helped to learn a few skills that I would have employed outside as well. Like because everything is digital now, it would be nice. But yeah, I mean, in those ways, it's definitely outdated. But at the same time, the argument, of course, is that JJ is technically free. Like, the fee structure is like minimal as compared to other schools. So it's definitely still valid to go study there.
Yeah, I mean, I do see your point actually, because the industry changes quite quickly at this point. Like with every year we are seeing some sort of an update that happens on a technological level, or even like I feel like a lot of political reasons also, you know, a lot of like society oriented thoughts also kind of seep into the growth of art, you know, certain forms of art. So schools have to be a little more open to that, right? So but like even you go and teach right now, like even like recently you were in Bangalore, where you were actually mentoring some students and helping them out. So how do you approach teaching students at this point? What are the kind of principles that you're kind of imparting to folks entering at this point?
Honestly, I try and stick to the foundation level. I don't think of myself as a teacher at all, because I'm not great at, the essential. There are a few things that you would definitely need to have if you're going to be a teacher, right? Like public speaking is one, patience is one, being able to communicate with a large kind of audience, large number of young audience is one. I don't think I have those qualities. But at the same time, it's a nice little break to travel to different cities, and especially to NID, and being able to interact with the students, because it's just nice to talk to a different kind of audience once in a while. I prefer to teach the foundation skills. Just simply because then it's like you have something you have something specific to talk about, right? Because the higher you go in any kind of art, any kind of creative field,
the conversation becomes more internal.
Exactly. Things tend to get a little more abstract, and then it's a harder conversation to have, because then it would depend on what the artist's intention is, what their personal relationship with the medium is, etc., right? But it's easier to talk to when you're discussing perspective, or discussing the human form, discussing like drawing the specifics of drawing, not sophisticated drawing, but just building forms or silhouettes, or stuff like this, extremely basic things, but which definitely help the artist or help the creator build on to the next level. So I prefer to get in on those levels and try and give them cheat codes that I probably took a longer time to find, like in my own career. So it'd be if so I try to give the students the same thing that I would have liked at that age and probably didn't get.
No, the reason why I'm curious because your work in general is very like you coming from a traditional fine arts background, your take on art is very unconventional. It's very different. Like you probably use a lot of the same materials and everything, but the final marks that we see that you present to your audience is very different from what's expected from an Indian fine arts education or commercial art education background, right? So that's what I'm thinking. Like, if the knowledge that you're imparting is more of practices that they can take in, or like the way they can think of mark making, because even thinking of Kuntam, right? Like these were forms that emerged out of nowhere, right? So it's basically lines on a page which with a certain mark making, a 2D flat line becomes more dimensional, right? So that's where I get curious, because how are students, like your students, perceiving the knowledge? Like, does that help them become more different? And in that process, does it make them like not great students for the college but incredible artists in the long run? So like how your insight helped them at the end.
So biggest takeaway that I'd like students uh, to have is the medium doesn't really matter.
Okay.
Is if there's one thing that I'd like to give to the students is the fact that, like I said, the medium isn't really of consequence. Like once you understand the idea, once you your intent for the drawing, and once you understand the basics of it, like the shape design, or the value structure of your drawing, then you can put it with you can use any medium you want. It can be digital, it
Of
can
course.
be traditional, it can be mixed media. So the fact that you have a certain process of
Right.
drawing or image making,
Hmm.
and that can lead you into different media
Right.
and try and mix the mediums together is something that I like to do. I don't like to tie myself down to any medium. So if I if I if I see something, if I have an interesting idea, if I see an image that if in my head I really want to put down on paper, and I see it a certain way, and if I try and mix it up, I try it, and I use a certain medium, and say in that particular moment it works out for me. I don't want to be stuck to the idea that, oh, but I thought of it as a graphite drawing, so I have to stick to
Right.
graphite drawing. I'm open to it being an ink drawing or even whatever the fuck, it doesn't matter. So I really like my students to have that idea that the image is what matters.
Right.
It's not a digital drawing, it's not a graphite drawing,
Right.
it's not an oil painting. It doesn't matter what medium it is. Like
Hmm.
it's okay to break that process down and think of it just as a specific image. And
Right.
anyway, these days, since everything turns out to be on the internet anyway, so it's going to be
Right.
it doesn't really matter what. Of course, like I prefer traditional media,
Right.
but honestly, it doesn't really matter. So that's one thing that I really like my voice. And and the process essentially remains the same, right? I mean, the drawing process remains the same. It doesn't really matter
Right.
which medium you use.
I think the context shifts a lot more
Yeah,
than your process at the end of the
exactly.
day,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
But also, like, since you are also by training, by your products, you essentially are someone who's creating tangible products. Essentially, I hate calling it product because they're like genuine forms
yeah.
of art, but like
Right.
everything, like it's best perceived in front of you where you can touch the paper. So have you tried the whole gallery scene in India? Like, has that something that's something you want to try out?
I have an idea for a series of paintings that
Mm-hmm.
I've been toying around with. I have an idea for about 20 to 30 pieces.
Right.
And as soon as I'm done with Chavi, I would love to. So I have this 10-year plan for myself. I don't
Okay.
know how much of that will come true. So I
Mm-hmm.
would like to give a period of, say, 5 to 6 years to this graphic novel project that I discussed with you. Like, this is
Right.
the comic book, the series of books.
Right.
I don't know how much is this practical. It's just the plan I have in mind. And then as soon as I'm done with that, I would love to try and dedicate some time to painting. I have already started. Like you can see, it's blurry, but I think you can see
Yeah,
images.
I got a
And
glimpse of it. Yeah.
yeah, so I have a series of paintings in mind, acrylic or oil. I'm not 100% sure,
Okay.
but I have a series. But it has to do with Kuntam itself. It's
Mhm.
mostly going to be the collector series expanded to
Interesting.
a large to multiple different series. But the idea is, yeah, I want to try and explore that space a little bit more. And I have a pretty fair idea of what I want, and that might change in the next 5-7 years while I draw this project. But yeah, I think if you ask me now, that's what I would like to do. So I mean, I don't know how it's going to be perceived or how I'm going to tap into the whole fine art market as you asked me,
Mhm.
but I have an idea for what I want to do. And hopefully I'll be financially independent to not have to worry about grants and funds and all that jazz.
Right.
Um, so, I mean, hopefully I'll be able to, fund it myself and I'll just produce the work. If it's, we'll see how it gets received.
Right.
I'm not particularly concerned about that.
Hmm. Yeah,
And if
because
the Indian fine arts market, if they reject me, they reject me. I don't care. I'm still going to produce the work.
the reason why I ask about the fine art market, because I don't see you becoming a part of the fine art market, but I see your work as breaking that mold of what constitutes a fine art gallery scene in India. Because with the homogenization of artworks online and everything becoming digital, everything becoming quick, I suddenly see that niche in artists doing their own gallery shows. And in cities like Bombay, right, where everyone likes the whole human connection. So doing like a show, which is, even if it's self-funded, right, I see a lot more people coming and, checking the work out. At least, if there's a community around it, people can actually come in and enjoy together. And India, I don't know, like, I'm not sure. Probably there needs to be a bit more research about it. I feel Indians like to step away from their houses and indulge in actual social activities, specifically when it comes to art. So that's why you have so many different art fairs. You have Kala Ghoda, then you have the I don't know, it's called Biennale in Kerala. I don't
No,
know.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So like those almost feel like they're movements on their own, and almost these events become a bigger deal because of the constant conversation around them. So for someone of your caliber, like if you do like your own gallery scene, like not connecting with any specific gallery, but you essentially just put the word out that I'm going to present these paintings of mine, and your own fraternity of artists come in and check it out together, and their followers, they all come together. I feel like it's a pretty interestingly thriving market, which will only get better the more times that we do it at the end of the day.
I guess so. And like I know nothing about the the fine art market, unfortunately, so I can't really pitch in about that. But
Right.
but yeah, you're right. Like I'm like at this point, like I mentioned before, right? My drive in this is to just produce. I
Right.
have a few things in mind. I just want to put them out. So this happened recently. Like
Mhm.
after like I'm 34 now, right?
Right.
And I'm going to be 35 this year,
Mhm.
which means I mean last year or so I started getting this feeling of okay, so I've entered my 30s,
Mhm.
and I'm pretty sure that this feeling, this vitality of life, right, that we have in our 20s and 30s, is already slipping away. Like I'm working out every day, I'm not able to see much of a difference. Like, it's really hard to lose weight.
Right.
I'm losing hair, you know, and I'm slowing down. My knees starting to hurt a little bit.
Mhm.
So I'm starting to feel that okay, so things are going to be start changing now, and I
Right.
need to, if I have something in mind, I need to put it out. Like
Right.
now is the time, because I mean, of course, I'm not saying that I'm old or anything. Like I
Mhm.
still have a lot of whatever vitality, etc. But I don't want to leave it to my 40s and 50s.
Right.
Just simply because I know that sitting on a project I will start to lose interest, and that's what happens with me. So my problem is that uh, I can't let projects go.
Hmm.
If I have an idea and if I've started developing it, I have to finish it. But that doesn't mean that I'll set deadlines and I'll finish it. That means that I'll finish it even if it takes 20 years.
Right.
But that's not a great thing. So my priority now is to have those projects in my pipeline and try and fund, keep doing commercial work and try and fund these projects and get them done in the next 5 to 10 years. And that's basically my intent in my career at this point. If I hopefully I'll reach a point where I don't have to. So that's my biggest effort now. Is to kind of break away from the whole commercial work like at all and be completely focused on my independent work, which will take some time. Hopefully it will happen in the next 3 to 5 years, hopefully. And if it doesn't work, if it doesn't happen, I'll keep working on it. That's just not much I can do about that. But hopefully, I mean, if I keep my sustained effort going, I feel like it will. But I need to keep producing these things now, like especially in my 30s. As I need to be able to see them finished by the time I'm in my mid 40s. And that's what I'm most concerned about at this point. Like I'm not concerned about how they're received or how the art market reacts to it or whatever. Most of they like it. And right now I just like a big itch that I need to scratch. Like, I just need to put these things out. Because the biggest concern was that I've been doing all these projects with writers and I have a lot of love for all my collaborators. They're like my closest friends and I owe a lot to them and a lot of respect, etc., etc. But at the same time, I have a few ideas that I need to put those things out as well. And if I don't do that, it just eat at me. So it's just a compulsion at this point to try and put these things out. Yeah.
Wow. No, I completely agree with you because as artists, like, yes, I know that a lot of it is about, just creating and just like, I feel like we're also very privileged as artists, like we at least being able to make a living out of something that we were doing as children as well. It is like, even if it's a cultivated privilege, it is a privilege at the end of the day for us. Not a lot of people get the opportunity to do this, but also like a lot of the value that comes from art is I won't call it the celebrity aspect of it, but at least having an audience and trying to find ways to have a diversified audience through your work, even if they disagree with the take that you have on a project, but at least there is a conversation happening around. That's what keeps these images alive, right? That's what transcends your mortal life, essentially. You not remain existing on this world anymore. That conversation around your image or a certain thing. For example, if Kuntum becomes a big thing, this incredible non-existing focal object for an entire art movement becomes a conversation for someone else to think on top of that. So like art movements keep on going forward. Like I remember like back in 2019, like I had a chance to meet Greg Manches, and when I was looking at him painting, and I was just talking to him about like, his influences, about people people who have influenced him. And one person who he really looks up to is Frank Duveneck. But his point was, even at that point, he's like, old masters have done what they had to do because they painted stuff for their time. We need to paint stuff for our time. Because the more we live in the past, our future generations are thinking that, okay, we don't have anything viable to provide other than politics or like new age business tactics. Like art also needs to move forward, right? Because that conversation will bring it. Also, it becomes a part of history, essentially. So putting things out there, having more conversations, having more say in a certain thing only gets recorded as a document for future generations to have a look at it. That's how we live through all of those elements.
And I think it's inevitable too. Like even if you don't think about it, these changes and these movements will keep happening like throughout history.
Of course,
I don't think I mean, as people, I don't think we can stop that. Like even if no advances in art happen, right? In Indian art happens, say for example, like other things will keep moving and that will keep influencing art itself. Like AI, for example, right? That's already started to influence things in the art scene. So these things, even external forces will keep influencing the art world anyway.
Right.
So even if it doesn't want to shift and change, it will still happen. So it's not even so my addition to your point is that it's an you're right, these movements will happen and will continue to happen. But at the same time they're inevitable. Even if
Right.
nothing is making it happen, they will still keep happening. So
Right.
it's interesting. Yeah.
I mean, I agree with you, but also somewhere I disagree a little bit because, like, on the education side of things, there have been some talks happening lately about how certain things that are taught in schools have been, like, institutions have started erasing certain core aspects of historical education, right? Because there is a political agenda behind it, right? So there, like, depending on the government, or depending on the kind of people who are in control, a lot of conversations can get lost, right? And that's a little scary for me to think about, even
Yeah.
like suddenly removing significant parts of history just because it does not align with our current view of the world doesn't mean that we don't read about it, we don't study about it. So even if something which is like, I mean, I guess in a sense I'm probably agreeing with you more, because like it's inevitable. Like even removing a conversation is a conversation at the end of the
Exactly. Yeah.
day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And but it's an interesting argument. And also then we step into censorship, right?
Right.
Which is the whole subject to discuss, and that's something that I've been thinking about as well, because then that makes me glad that like fringe mediums like say comics in India. I mean, there is a reason why they're fringe, and then that
Right.
gives you an opportunity to play into those ideas because it's
Right.
not widely consumed.
Right.
Then you can kind of get into subjects that may be controversial. You know what I mean?
Right.
So things like people with with more mass consumption can't possibly do. Say you can't make a film about something that's controversial, right? Because obviously that will be a whole
Right.
uh, can of worms. But at the same time, you can make a comic about it, and
Yeah.
it will reach an audience. It won't reach an audience as big as say a film will, but you will still reach an audience, and it'll still be accessible to people in the future, even if it's not reaching an audience like a mass audience now. So,
Right.
which I mean, we're circling back to our earlier conversation about the fact that the comics and these mediums, animation, for example, don't
Right.
have mass appeal in India.
Right.
But now I'm thinking maybe that's a good thing. Maybe we can
Yeah.
touch upon controversial subjects. We can discuss politics. We can discuss religion, for example, and have the unconventional takes on those subjects
Right.
and things that you will get mobbed for
Right.
if you are or lynched for if you are making a film on it. Because you
Right.
can't make a controversial film in India now. You just can't. It won't work
Because think about
unless
the
you want to make
audience
noise
who's
about it.
right. Because think about the audience who's actually going to be receiving these projects. They are like, if someone is making the decision to read a graphic novel, they're
Exactly.
already with a very
It's a
conventional mindset. They want to look beyond the norms, essentially. They want to
correct.
see a different take. So
Correct.
in a way, it still seeps into the culture. Like I feel like illustration from uh, older times, like for example, when we look at a lot of these illustrations done during terrible war times, like Kathy Kolwitz's work, it talks about so much pain and suffering, and that's so obvious through her mark making, right? Like it basically screams grief and loss, right? Or even Francis Bacon's work, you can see a certain level of aggression through the mark making. So even those things add, like, again, like they can also become very controversial, but they're very intimate as well. So like a small group of people will probably take it in, but it's all that matters, because even a small group of people will take that conversation forward with them, right?
100%. I 100% agree. And
Yeah.
I think that's one way to kind of tap into the fact that we have a small audience,
Mm-hmm.
so we can experiment with these mediums.
Right.
And like we discussed, like if you're a filmmaker, for example, you'd have to
Mm-hmm.
find ways to kind of tackle that.
Mm-hmm.
Say if you want to say something that's a little bit more controversial, you have to
Right.
say it metaphorically, or you'd have to have layers and layers of meaning, and then be able to kind of say the same thing that you want to. There's no way that you can directly say a controversy, especially something about religion or something about all these cultural issues that we have, political issues that we have. We can't make those statements at this point. But unless there's metaphor involved. But in comics we can, and I think that's a great thing, and I think we'll see that. We have seen that before also,
of course,
with books and with comic books. I think we'll see more of that, especially in the whole zine culture of India. Right? I think that's one space that's really interesting at this point, because we see a lot of independent creators creating zines, and we have zine. We just had Indie Comics Fest here in Mumbai, where a bunch of my contemporaries were, and I wasn't able to attend it, unfortunately. But yeah, I mean, I saw a lot of people that I really admire, both host and attend. So definitely it's a field where new things are happening, and I think it will only grow.
That's very interesting. Okay, let's switch to a lighter topic. I wanted to talk about sketchbooks in general, because my initiation towards your work happened through your sketchbook work, specifically your sketches of your grandmother, even in the hospital when you were sitting around her. So I want to approach the concept of sketchbooks from a different angle, as to not from the angle of artworks, but from the angle of the relation that you have with people who you're drawing. Because you and I also have a couple of mutual friends, and they've always spoke very highly of you as an incredible friend. Like before an artist, you're an amazing friend, Godwin, and I 110% agree with them. But when I look at your work, like, you basically draw those mundane moments with friends. So what is the role of friendships and family and emotional connection towards your subject matter? What role does that play for you, for your artistic process?
So I think the role that my sketchbook has played in my life has changed quite a bit with time. So initially, like I mentioned, I was the kind of person who had to draw, had to draw, right? So at that time, it was just a matter of putting things down on paper. So I had to just draw. And I'm for some reason, this is very this isn't as popular as it should be. Like the idea of drawing from life, right? Not live drawing. So there's a very distinct difference between live drawing and drawing from life, right? Live drawing is when there's a model sitting, and people are sitting around the model and drawing the model, right? So the model is essentially subject of your attention and of your art. But similar thing with live drawing. Of course, live drawing, you're sitting and drawing someone too. But the biggest difference between drawing from life and live drawing is that the person you're drawing is aware of your existence. They are aware of the fact that they're being drawn, they're being looked at. So they're aware of the gaze. They're aware of being the subject of attention, right? Or object of attention in that case. And for me, it takes away from it a lot, which is why I don't attend a lot of live drawing classes or teach or go and draw in live drawing classes. I prefer to draw from life in public, or draw it in social settings, or drawing my friends, which is where your question comes in. Why? I mean, the reason, the role it plays in my art, right? So I think of it in that way. So even when I'm sitting and drawing my friends, most of the time they are not conscious of the fact that I'm drawing them. And the human form exists in two ways. It exists and in a extremely subconscious way when they're not looked at, when they're not being observed, when the human form is not being observed. It looks a certain way, it exists a certain way. And it exists in a different way when it's very aware of being perceived.
Interesting. Okay.
So when you look at a live drawing model, or a model of any kind, or anyone on screen, they will look a certain way. They look different from when they're not. I'm repeating myself, I know, but I'm just trying to clarify this in my own head, because I haven't expressed this idea a lot to a third person. But say I'm sitting and I'm on my phone, right? The way I'm slouching now, I'm acting like I would be when I'm not being seen, but I'm sure it's different from the way I would actually be sitting and looking at my phone. and slouching when I know that no one is looking at me. And I love that difference in the human body. I'd love to explore that idea. I love to explore those differences in the human body, especially when it's not aware of being looked at.
Interesting. So
And that's way more interesting to me than drawing someone who knows they're posing for me. It's then it's a mutual transactional relationship, right? When someone is sitting for me and I'm drawing them. But I don't find it as interesting as when it's a one-sided relationship, when the subject or object of my art or my gaze is completely unaware that I even exist. Which is why I find it so interesting to go out and draw in a train or in a pub or whatever. It doesn't matter. But I find that more interesting. But again, with that, biggest discussion to be had is of consent. Because then what is the difference between me drawing someone or me putting a photograph of someone? Right. Obviously, taking a photograph is not okay of a stranger, right? Without their consent or without their knowledge. So is it okay to draw them without their consent or knowledge? Then obviously there's no answer to this. And I will still keep drawing it even if it's wrong.
This reminds me of the conversation we recently had when we met, where we were discussing a certain artist who's known for drawing other people and how much of it feels staged and is it actually a very consensual process or was it seen under? But I think that's something I have not thought about, to be very honest, because maybe it becomes a bigger issue if you're photographing someone else, because that's like almost like there's that defensive mechanisms that work into yourself if you're sitting and someone's taking a picture of you.
Exactly.
But when someone's sitting and drawing you, I don't know, have you had experiences where someone got offended with your
surprisingly not even once. Like I've drawn from life a lot. And there have been a lot of instances where they've found out that I've been drawing, they've seen me drawing them. But I've never really had a confrontational moment. But at the same time, I always respect that. I mean, people will act a certain way if they don't want to be drawn, right? And also, I don't really make eye contact in this. I try to look as not creepy as possible. So if they're aware, I mostly just look away or draw something else, or I try to keep it organic. But at the same time, if they do find it offensive, they do have an issue with it, then I will stop. I will not, because my art is important to me, but it's not more important than
crossing someone's personal boundaries.
It's not. I don't think that's cool, and I don't think my art is like. I don't think there's like a whole nobility to the act of drawing and all of that. Oh, that's nonsense. Like I do it for my pleasure and satisfaction. There's no higher motive to that. So, but then the second part of your question was about family and friends, right? And I think with age, I've started to realize how important that is. So a lot of the times I would definitely, and now people who live with me or people who like my family, my parents, my sister, my wife, my close friends, they all know that if I'm having a nice time, I'll pull up my sketchbook and draw. That's my definition of having a nice time. So they will not be like, "Arey, kya kar raha hai? Baat karna, sketching kyun kar raha hai?" They will not. They will just know that. "Arey, that's what I do." So the definition of nice time for me is sitting when I visit my parents' house, having chai with my mom, dad, having conversations with them while I draw. I never always just draw. I'm always talking to them. I'm watching a Malayalam film and having tea and playing with the dogs. My mom has 2 dogs, so we're playing constantly. There's always dogs around. So the definition of a good time for me is sitting with these people and drawing. And they're almost never, it's that same thing where they're not aware of that I'm drawing. They don't care also, because I've practically trained them for many years to just be aware. They won't stiffen up if I'm drawing them. They will not even notice that I'm drawing. It doesn't matter to them. So, and I think of that as quality time. Because then I'm not sitting on my desk and drawing. But while I'm also drawing, it's also conversations. It's also I'm having a good time with them, and I think it's a way for me to put my priorities together: of family, of spending time with them, of like private, of these relationships, and of my drawing as well, because that's also important. So yeah, I mean, it's a way for me to put these things together. Like these things don't, your art doesn't exist in a vacuum. You can't be away from, you can't, I mean, this whole idea of the hermit artist who goes away in a cave and produces amazing art for 10 years, then comes out and shows to the world, "Yo, देखो मैंने क्या बनाया, क्या amazing चीज बनाया." People are like, "Arey, amazing." I mean, that's nice. It's all romantic, but I don't think it exists. Like, people have real lives, they have families, and if you don't respect your family, you don't give your family time, don't nurture it, then it's not worth it for them. Right? If I don't spend time with my wife, it's not worth it for her. Like, she's not going to sacrifice her time and her life and her career for my interest in my art. That's not fair to ask for her, from her as well. So even though I do want to produce art, keep producing art, it's important for me to give them time and give them effort, as family members and friends as well. But at the same time, the middle ground is basically I'll draw when I'm with them. but I think they're okay with it. Thankfully, they're okay with it at this point.
You know what you said about, like, I found that part very interesting, where you said that you're not, like, even if you're not directly looking at someone while you're drawing them, but getting us, like, almost, trying to take, like, notes, visual notes of someone's presence, right? Like the kind of mindset they're in, the kind of posture they're in, like not being very specific, that kind of really beautifully connects back to your writing process. As you said, that the moment you sit and think specifically that, okay, I have to write something, that's too direct, too conscious an approach. But I like, maybe you can tell me if I'm thinking in a different way, but like, I think you prefer having a more natural, organic flow in your creative process. Like the best work comes out of not thinking of it as a task that you have to get done, but almost it's like just a part of your life at that moment. So like, even if you're like walking around narrating the story to you, it's basically conversation that you're having with yourself.
Exactly.
Right?
That's exactly it.
So with your sketchbook work, it's kind of the same thing. Like I even also remember, because I think one of your earlier influences was Sterling Huntley, right? And his work also has a very similar feeling to it. Like there is this beautiful voice that he has developed of showing mundane moments, but using graphic elements, essentially. So bringing something unique to things that are mundane and very normal around you. If it's a ball of yarn, or there's like a dog sitting somewhere, or your partner sitting and just drinking a cup of coffee, just like capturing that, but adding a certain glimpse of how you think. Like probably you're not seeing it that way. Like for example, a lot of your work and a lot of work that Somnath Par, there is this beautiful blend of unconventional, ridiculous thinking, but connecting with normal life, right? So how do you think about that? Because it brings me to an idea of abstract thinking. Like what role does like abstraction play in a creative statement for us?
So when it comes to sketchbooks, I like to keep those two worlds very separate. I don't like them to mix, just simply because I feel like two different parts of my brain are involved. And I also draw very different ways, if you've noticed. Like if I'm drawing my sketchbook from life, I try to keep it as literal as possible. I try to keep it just as a recorder, as someone who almost in a journalistic way just records what they see.
Right.
I don't.
That's an interesting word that you use, journalistic way. Yeah, that's definitely something that's conveyed here.
Yeah, it's just an absent-minded recording of life, almost like a diary. But when I'm drawing in my sketchbook without references, without only from imagination, I draw in a very different way.
Right.
And that's where I like to play or fuck around a little bit with shapes and organic forms, and a lot of kuntham is that.
Right.
So and a lot of my comic stuff also comes from that. So these two worlds I very rarely mix. Soames, I think, is a little bit different approach of thinking. I don't think he has that barrier between his. So his
is more
kind of mix
a combination of that. Right?
Exactly. Yeah, it kind of with me, like very rarely will those things mix. Like I don't like them mixing at all. If they mix, they'll be very intentionally mixed. Like they won't. For him, it's like a ebb and flow, like a very organic thing. But I think his approach to drawing is very different from mine in that, and we also have many parallels because we are close friends. Things tend to be very organic. But at the same time, there's that one thing is very very distinct in our art. But yeah, so these two different worlds, the weird bit of it is, it's like for me, like I don't like to address the weird. You know what I mean? If I'm drawing something unconventional,
Right.
I'd I'd want I would want the audience to feel that certain sense that I'm feeling when I'm drawing it, but I don't want to address it
Right.
directly. I think the moment you address the weird, it takes away from it.
Right.
I think, like, for example, if there's a setting and if there are three characters and one of those characters is slightly off, like there's something off about that character. Say the arm is bent in the opposite way. Something, anything, can be anything. But there's a clear distinction if the other two characters notice and observe that thing that is off, and they're addressing that thing that is off beat. It comes off very differently from if those two characters were completely oblivious to that.
Right.
Like the moment that in world, I'm talking about in universe, in the universe of that drawing, say, or painting, whatever image.
Right.
The moment that the weird is addressed, it kind of takes away from that. And I like the fact that it never. So you'll notice in my drawings, like I never really, even if it is a weird thing, I don't address the fact that it's weird.
Right.
I like to keep it. Even the other characters within the image will not address. And if they are addressing it, it's very intentional. And that's something that I definitely like to have in my stuff. In fact, I don't even like the word of weird, because weird or odd or whatever. The moment you call something weird, it becomes, you look at it a certain way, right? You have to have you have to think of the conventional to be able to think of the weird, right? You have to set boundaries.
Right.
You have to set the baseline and then think of what the weird is. The weird can go up and down, right? It's from the baseline, but you have to define the baseline for that. I don't like to define the baseline with my stuff, and that's where I think it comes from. That's where the abstraction comes from, I think. And I think with time it will keep going, and I'll be able to find more abstract in the art. Right now, it's still I'm still exploring and I'm still finding things out.
But then,
yeah, like
go ahead.
Go on. Like I didn't have anything new.
No, so like, but then like, because I'm more curious as to what you said actually makes sense, because now when I'm recollecting the images in my head, I do see that the weirdness is not a specific thing about the work, essentially. Like it's a part of it, but it's almost like a feeling that gets attached to it rather than a specific thing that we're looking for. But like it kind of reminds me of a lot of genre projects. Like, for example, even in a horror genre, most films don't work out because it's too focused on the horror aspect rather than the human aspect of the story. Like probably a person's quest to survive in a difficult situation, kind of somewhat of maybe a child dealing with separation of his or her parents, something like that. That's something which is your human hook to a story.
Right.
But probably it's happening in a situation which is more paranormal. So that's where like people will connect to the story more, rather than having a story where you just see random ghosts jumping into the frame here and there, and it's only about the horror element rather than what is it leading to. So
exactly.
probably it's a very bad parallel to pull to your work.
No, but I get what you mean. I get what you mean. The moment you pin it, the moment you tell your audience that this is what it's about, this is what you have to fear, it kind of takes away from that, I feel. And I think that's what you mean, right? I mean, I think it makes a lot of sense.
But then, like the question that I have is that, is there something consciously that you're doing in your images that is being able to fool us into not paying too much attention to the unconventional, unique intricacies of the image? Is there something directly? I'm saying, if I'm asking you if you can like basically almost technically break down to a certain level, because like maybe no one will do that, but then again, knowing how your image can fool us into not figuring out what that is gives a food for thought for a lot of artists to think a little more out of the box and not make it a very cliche gimmicky thing, but have more, thought-provoking images at the end?
Honestly, I don't know, because it's just like I've started to kind of draw a certain way where I'm almost absent from the creative process itself.
Okay.
Like especially for the Kuntham stuff, especially for the collector drawings. I think you mean the collector series, right? I think most of the stuff has that, what do you call, weird, right?
Right.
And I think I try not to devise a structure for it, just simply because I feel like it needs to.
Actually,
I don't know
more
how to
than
put this.
Kuntham, I was thinking like stuff like that you've done for the series that you did called Boathead.
Oh yeah.
Right?
No, Boathead was very definitely very conscious.
Right. But then again,
Boathead,
as
I
you
just
said,
wanted
it
to.
did not really like I when I was thinking about those images, even like the whole amputee series of images that you did, like there is something a little off about it, but I'm not focusing directly on that.
Right.
Like I'm letting that part go for me. Like, okay, a boat for a head. Like I'm not worrying about that
Correct.
anymore. Like it does not feel weird.
Mm.
So that's what I want to know.
So
What is that
so I
conscious
think.
effort that's coming in?
Okay, so with Boathead, I wanted to explore the idea of motherhood a little bit. Um, just simply of this human woman being a surrogate to a boathead child, for example.
Okay.
I mean, it's a code for a different species. It doesn't have to be whatever. Head for a boat is just like a thing. Like, it doesn't have to be that. It can be anything.
Right.
But the idea is that the mother is a surrogate, and the child with the boat head grows and becomes an adult. And I wanted to explore this relationship that he has with humans and his human mother, for example. Right. So that was a very, very conscious decision. That was a very thought out decision. But at the same time, I think that as humans, right, if you provide people, your audience, with a baseline, like we mentioned before, you can convince them you can convince them of anything.
Right.
As long as you give them a baseline, you tell them what the normal is.
Right.
And you can go anywhere up or down from that normal. You just have to define that normal.
Right.
You have to tell the audience that this exists in this world. That's it. You don't need to go into it a lot. But it has to make sense. But within the world, it has to be consistent. Like once you tell the audience that this is the baseline, you can't then tell them that this is the baseline later in the next scene.
Right.
Then you have to be consistent.
Right.
You know what I mean? Then the weirdness can go up and down, but the baseline needs to remain there.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, of course.
Because then, if you think about all the media that we've consumed, right? All the science fiction, fantasy, whatever media that we've consumed, like we are able to like, what's the term? What of disbelief? What's the term?
Right.
Suspension of disbelief, right?
Suspension of right.
That's the idea, right? That humans you can tell them anything, they'll believe it if it remains consistent with the idea. Like your story can't go too up and down. Like once you define terms, it has to remain the same. But it can be anything. So as long as you are consistent in world, in universe, you can still fuck around any way you want. So I think that ability for humans to think beyond us, beyond anthropomorphic, like beyond human forms, I think that's very interesting. And I think that's what interests me with this more than the weird.
Right.
Because you can convince people that the weird is the norm, but you have to still then make it make sense within the laws established in that world.
Right.
And that's, I think, where the real interest
essentially
is.
Building context for a long enough period so that people understand that even if it's weird, like because we live in a world, we have multiple different cultures. Rarely do we know too much about another specific culture. But if we spend enough time with them, we start seeing the unknown elements fade away, and we kind of connect with it at the end of it. I guess even with like an IP like Star Wars, if I think about it, maybe the stories don't really resonate with me, but something that I find very interesting is that they have a lot of these alien creatures, right? And for the film, that essentially they're rarely actually like CG characters. They're actually prosthetics, like animatronics prosthetics. And when you look at it, they don't look like great prosthetics as well at times. It's very obvious that they're made of silicone. But somebody just let that idea go at this point. Like you don't like. In fact, if it starts feeling too CG, it takes you away from that world.
It takes you out.
Suddenly.
Exactly.
Right.
It does. It is this amazing ability that humans have to give life to something. I think that's very interesting. We discussed it before with Kuntam, right? But it's a very interesting idea. Like for example, this is like not so extreme an idea, but Louis C.K. in his like series called Louis, right?
Right.
In one of the seasons, I think his ex-wife he just cast a black woman as his ex-wife, and the kids are still white. So it's not doesn't really make sense. But in world it remains and makes sense. You know what I mean? And the acting still is there, and it's still the story still makes sense. So you suspend that disbelief, and you're okay to you're still willing to run with the story just because everything else works. Then you kind of look past the fact that but the kids are not, you know what I mean? So you don't really think about it, but because it makes sense. But at the same time, like if everything else falls apart, then that thing will start to really bother you.
Right.
But so it's possible to, if you're consistent and if everything else works out, then you can, then these things will, I mean, the audience doesn't really care about little details.
That makes an interesting point for, as a creator, like you essentially, you're basically providing the audience your look at the thing. So if you start mentioning certain things as, okay, this is weird in the frame, everyone will refer to it as a weird thing. But if it just, fades into the story immediately, I feel a lot of the film industry really fails with this concept too much, because they go into a very woke aspect at times with their films, and suddenly they make a marginalized thought as a primary focus in the project, and that
they acknowledge it.
They acknowledge it. Hurts the product even further.
It does.
Right?
It does.
Because you're making it's more than a story. It becomes a statement at the end of the
day. Correct. Exactly.
Right? In fact, if they blend into it, like if you don't even refer to it,
it shouldn't matter.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. You're totally right, and that's what I meant about like drawing weird shit.
Right.
Like it wouldn't be weird because it just exists and it's not addressed. It just, then the whole subject of weird doesn't exist. Like Rick and Morty did that really well in the first few seasons before it went bad. Now it's garbage. But before, in the first couple of seasons, like Rick and Morty did it really well, because there's so many weird things happen. But because the baseline is established and because it works in universe, it all makes sense, and people are still able to run with it. And I think it's a lot of people do that. I think it's like, but like you say, like when people are trying to make statements, and when people are trying to say, "Oh, look, there's a black person here, or a transgender person. Look, we've got a gay person to act for this role, or hey, this is a gay person." Then it takes away from that, because it acknowledges
you're setting up the context for people to start talking about it too much, because now you're basically assigning a thought that you want to put forward, rather than, okay, it's just world, it's just this
there. Yeah, exactly.
There.
You don't have to talk about it.
Right.
Exactly. That's exactly it. That's exactly it. Yeah.
Wow. There is a show, I don't know if you watched, it's called Schitt's Creek.
Right.
I
think I watched the first season, and then I think I dropped off.
Right. So it's pretty obvious that the world, like the story that they have, the premise is the son, he is a pansexual being, but it is never referred to constantly as a thing. Like everyone just knows that, okay, he has a male partner, he has a female partner, doesn't matter. And that's why like it becomes so much more genuine. So even if like at a moment in the story, if the character does something which requires us to defend him, we will defend him, or we will like hate on him, regardless of what his orientation is, because it's not a conversation anymore.
Correct. No, I feel like if it comes down, like when it comes down to it, most people don't really care about it. And especially in media, like unless it's the extreme right.
Right.
Most people in the center or I mean, don't really care about these things. Like if it's a good story, they're willing to completely accept whatever. It honestly doesn't matter. Like to most people, is what I think. But
Wow.
yeah, I like how all everything we discussed like has finally brought us to like race and like these things and
I mean,
sexual orientation.
I mean, there was a point where I would resist these conversations,
Right.
and also maybe because it came from a place where I did not understand any of these things enough, and also there was probably a level of internal embarrassment as to I'm not educated enough to understand it. But with time, I started realizing that you don't have to be a spokesperson for these topics in order to have a conversation, because at the end these things also kind of seep into our art, the things that we do, any kind of projects that we work on. Certain elements would be a little bit more political, certain things would be a bit more oriented towards a certain religious concept or a propaganda concept or a social concept, right? And that's the best way I see people connecting to project, because at the core of it is human emotions at the end of it, like how we feel about a certain thing. So like you can, I think you can also watch an entire show where the main protagonist is essentially a criminal, right? And you will find ways of creating empathy for someone whose principles you do not believe in at all. Right. So that just speaks to our strength as, being compassionate regardless of what their lifestyle choices, what their political choices at
100%.
the end. Yeah.
100%. And I think this ability of a storyteller to make their characters empathetic, and when they want it, they not empathetic too, like for their audience to not empathize with the character. That's also an ability, right? For example, in Breaking Bad, like towards the end, it was really hard to stand with Walter, but at the same time, you still do kind of, because you stuck with him for so long. You want that full circle of a character arc for that character, right? So you still stick with it, but at the same time, he is irredeemable at that point. But it's interesting, like you bring it up, and especially in a country like India, like these discussions are inescapable. Like everything we do is a kind of a result of those things, and the idea of this whole religious divide that we're going through right now, and I don't see it getting better, to be honest, because it's like, I mean, from a atheistic point of view, and I've always had an atheistic point of view, it's like it's like seeing. I mean, I don't consider myself as part of the race or part of the clash. But at the same time, I kind of see both sides of the argument.
Right.
So it's a little bit hard to take sides or think of myself as a left or a right leading person. I don't know, like, but at the same time, you're right. Like, it's almost impossible to not discuss these ideas. It's especially if you're going to be telling a story. Like, how do you take these things out of your story, right?
Because, yeah, exactly. Because India being such a big country with such a huge population, I feel like any kind of thought process can have its own market over here, because you have so many different people, different states have different mindsets involved with it. Different income classes will have a different way of approaching things. So doing certain things, keeping in mind a certain group of people, would always have a market around it. So, I mean, for a time where, like even in the concept design side of things, jobs have been thinning up a little bit. But I don't look at it as a bad thing. In fact, I feel like artists finally are going to have an opportunity to be essentially artists, like, and honing a brand which is themselves, essentially. If you can, pave through a lot of the technical nonsense that's happening around and find a voice for yourself and just basically build something of, like I was reading, like I've been following Naval Ravikant's thought processes quite a bit for the past few months, and he said that, like, if you have a certain billion population in the world, I want to see certain billion businesses existing. So everyone's living the best financially, viable life, because everyone has their own voice, and uh, every unique voice serves a certain market essentially. And your uniqueness allows you to sell something that another person will not be able to sell. So that's where, having conversations which are not just on an image level. And also India, I feel like the youth is smart in India, is quite smart. Like they, Veerda says it constantly, like the Indian youth can smell bullshit very quickly. So that's why you can't sell Bollywood to them anymore. You can't sell the whole pretty girl walks walks up to you and
Correct.
violins playing
Correct.
behind you. That doesn't really set with anyone, because everyone understands the harsh realities of life, understand the relationships are difficult, you will suffer heartbreak, working job satisfaction is difficult. So everyone understands those things at certain level. So you can't fool them into thinking that certain things are not important. So having a say, like whether it's political or it's emotional as well, at least still gathers a certain crowd to you for you to cater towards. It doesn't have to be the entire country, but it will be a certain very specific but a very defensive uh, community towards you. They will protect you constantly. They will look forward to taking things from you constantly.
That's good to know.
Yeah.
That's good to know, especially if we have to say controversial things to our art. I think it's nice to know that there'll be some support to it, and I think there is always support to being able to freedom of speech, right? I mean, there's always people who stand up for that. I think there should be support for that. I mean, I'm the kind of person who thinks all kinds of speech should be people should be free to make to say anything, except of course, I mean, hate speech is too much,
Right.
but freedom of speech should be available to all,
Right.
like obviously. So, but India, mein, of course, that gets very complicated very very soon, um, and there are different shades and different colors and different grays to that.
Right.
So,
Yeah,
and
you
I
can't
don't
you
think we have
can't you
enough
can't have
time
a
to get
black and white.
into.
Definitely. No, we'll start wrapping this up. Like last few thoughts as to, like, because I want to know, like, okay, so now what's next for you? Like, what are are you going to be building more towards your personal projects, or you see more of uh projects with different publishers for DC Marvel? Like, so what are your next set of projects that you're focusing on at this point that we can look forward to?
So I started working in earnest in 2014, right?
Right.
And so I've been working for about 9 years,
Mhm.
and still I wouldn't consider 2022 as a very productive year in terms of commercial work, because I was focusing on my own stuff,
Right.
and I just produced like a bunch of work. So about 8 years, right? So 8 years I've been working about 80 to 90% commercial work. 80% pakad lo, because I'm still doing sketchbook and this and that.
Right.
Next 5 to 10 years, I want to change that equation from 80% to 30% commercial work.
Right.
Next 5 to 7 years. So right now, also, I'm not doing any long form sequential work. I've not taken up anything since 2020. March 2020, I was the last commercial long format comic book that I did.
Right.
Since then, I've only been doing commissions. I've had a lot of collector interest in original art, so I've been able to sustain myself just with that. I've been doing covers, um, and I've been doing commissions for private collectors.
Right.
But that's about it. Apart from that, I've been focusing entirely on my own personal stuff, and I want to keep going to the point where I can sustain myself entirely from. That's basically the effort, right? Like I discussed before. In the next 5 years, I want to be able to focus entirely on Chavi and on Kuntam, and
That's very cool.
hopefully be able to sustain myself just with those projects. It's going to be hard, of course, but we'll see how it goes. But that's my plan, to basically change that ratio from 80% to down to like a 20% would be ideal.
I'm so excited for it, because the one thing I've seen in people from Mumbai is that you guys have like serious work ethic. Like, I love the work ethic that everyone has over there, because everyone's striving to create something, and you recognize that there's a lot of manual, physical, hard labor involved in order to just get by. at some point. So like, I know it's going to be a lot of hard work, but I'm very excited to see what's going to come out.
Me too.
Yeah.
Me too. But yeah, I mean, a lot of the work is just sitting indoors and drawing, right?
Right.
Which is yeah, I mean, which is a good thing, but also it's like something I need to try and kind of fight against, because I need to also think about family. I think about health and social, the whole social aspect of it, and social media. You can't ignore the fact that you have to be on social media and
Right.
build a follower or whatever, build a
Hmm.
following and all of that. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I try not to think about it, but
Right.
it's hard not to,
Right.
especially because it has a direct consequence on your work.
Of
Like,
course.
if I had a much bigger audience, I would be able to fund my projects more easily, right?
And
So it has
you
a
can also
direct
control the perception that people have of your
correct,
work through social
correct,
media.
correct, exactly. So
Yeah.
it's a direct correlation. So it's not something. I mean, I'm not as much of a hermit to be able to say, "Oh, social media doesn't exist for
Hmm.
me." Like I don't care about it. I don't think it works that way.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, hopefully I'll be able to kind of manage it in a way where I haven't completely gone off the grid. But at the same time, I don't want to put too much time into it and take time away from, because it is very time consuming.
Of course.
Take time away from my projects, right? So hopefully I'll find a happy in between. I haven't been able to. I can either do too much or too little.
Right.
I
Do you
can't seem
have,
to be
like,
able
currently,
to.
do you have any non-art interest that stands out for you?
I've been working out,
Oh,
so
that's
that's
good.
one thing.
That's
Yeah,
good.
yeah. Not super heavy. Like I try to lift as much as I can.
Okay.
I have a decent enough routine.
Okay.
Hopefully I'll be able to start seeing differences in my in my physique soon, but I haven't been
Right.
able to just yet. Apart from that, not much really. Like I don't
Hmm.
really do all that much. Apart
I
from I'm
think
very
working
bored.
out is a great
Yeah,
non-art interest because, yeah, like with consistency, it takes a while till you see
yeah,
results coming out, but then it also becomes quite exponential because,
correct.
but then again, if you stop it, like it reduces
Yeah, then
again.
it
So,
exactly.
right.
Yeah, and also like my relationship with food is very weird because I'm an
Okay.
obsessive. Like I'm a binge eater.
Right.
So
Are
like
you a snacker as well?
oh, I'm definitely a snacker,
Okay.
and I won't even realize if I'm snacking. So my
Okay.
thing is that anything that happens to me translates to food.
Oh, okay.
Like if I'm having a great day, I
Hmm.
would want to sit with a beer and with like
Okay.
carbs,
Right.
like pizza or something. Or if I'm having a hot day, then if I'm on deadline, then everything is good. Then like, and I have to eat. Then I have to like reward myself with a really nice meal. Oh,
Right.
once I make this deadline, I'm going to sit down with something to watch
Right.
and I'm going to stuff my face. That's my reward, right? So I'm
Hmm.
trying to kind of get myself out of that a little bit, try to not fall into that,
Right.
because binge eating is my biggest what do you call it, problem vice at this point.
Right.
And the same with binge drinking, which is another issue of mine. I'm binge basically anything with binge in it. So even drinking, like
Right.
there's a point where I was drinking every day because
Right.
sitting at home working, especially when you're focused on deadlines, you need something to take the edge off, right? So
Right.
I'll have
Of
a
course.
drink on the side and then keep working, and it's nice. Like it's
Hmm.
right now, but talking about it makes me feel like a drink, but I'm gonna try not to. Uh,
Okay.
and
I see.
now I try to keep it for social. Like right here, you can see
Okay.
I've blurred it so that you can't see
Right.
it, but there's like a bunch of little mini bar over there. But
Oh, I see. That's
yeah,
cool.
I mean, whenever I still make myself a little drink
Right.
whenever I feel like, but I try not to binge it.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean,
Because
if you can find a balance point, I think.
yeah. So, yeah.
Right.
Som knows this about me very well because him and me, we do these sessions where we'll sit and talk about everything under the sun. We'll drink a bunch. We'll drink all night
Right.
and then go back home. And the next couple of days are totally ruined. But but yeah, like alcohol, food, like big issues for me. So I'm
Hmm.
trying to fix those things.
Hmm.
Um, trying to work out, trying to you know, get fit and all of those things. Apart from that, I listen to audiobooks a lot.
Right.
That's something I like to do. That's about it. I don't think I have any more interest.
That's very cool. No, I think, like, with the things that's lining up for you, finding like a good balance, because as you said, like with age also, you recognize your ability to do something will, the rate at which you can, deliver and produce, it will probably reduce over time. So taking charge of health and food and things is probably one of the best ways to find a certain level of control on that. So
100%.
yeah, I'm very excited to see what comes out. And anytime if you need me to market any of your products, I'll happily do that using this platform. Hopefully, even this platform will grow enough so that I can, I can grow to bigger and wider audiences. So at least I'll be able to help all my artist comrades to kind of sell their products through this platform. We can talk about it. You can come and pitch it through this, and I think it'll be very interesting.
I think it will. Like, I think the thing with an idea like this is just consistency, right?
Yeah.
The more you put out, I think the more, especially if it's YouTube. I mean, it's just numbers at that point. I mean, obviously, like, since it's you and I know you and the fact that you always have interesting conversations and you will continue to do this, I'm guessing. I think the challenge is to have this going on with other work and with like commercial stuff and with jobs and this and that.
Surprisingly, that doesn't bother me. I thought that it would bother me, that like, okay, I will have to figure out time. But I realized this is something I want this to grow regardless of my energy and my exhaustion, because I'm trying to remove the self from this project, because if this grows, this allows everyone else to understand how the conversations change through time. It almost becomes a point of artistic journalism, where we think about, like, even if at some point when you come back as a guest or something and you talk about something different, your take at that point would add something more to the conversation. So I'm constantly trying to remove my self from this. Like, if I can't do it, like, I'll definitely find someone else to continue it for me. So it needs to grow on that level, that there are more people who can bring their own ideas to build this out. But yeah, keeping authentic conversations alive and not very art-oriented conversation, like, that's something that's been run and done at this point. Like, getting into like, how to become an artist and stuff, like what pen do you use? It just does not make any more sense at all any further. But
no, that makes sense. And how many conversations have you had so far?
So right now, I think I've had 8 or 9. So like, only 3 of them have been released till now. And now again, I've lined up conversations with artists from next week as well. So now again, it's always a decision of the time zone as well, because some of the artists are outside India as well. So, but my focus is always, like, my intention is to make it comfortable for the guests. Like, based on your schedule, I reschedule. If you, even at the last moment, you can't do it, it's not a big issue, because right now consistency is only in the matter of putting the videos out rather than hitting a weekly requirement. That will become a thing eventually once this thing grows. And thankfully, by that time, I'll have a team to help me out with that. So then it will be a little easier for me. I don't have to actively sit and do everything, because right now, sitting and editing the videos, finding music, getting all the image slides and everything, it's all on me. But eventually, hopefully, if there's a team, I can, delegate tasks and it can become a more regularized thing at that point. And I also want other people to also come and host and ask questions, because I'll ask questions from a certain point of view that I have, but I want to see how other artists come and talk. Like even if there's a conversation where you and Somnath are talking to each other, it's almost like an artist conversation, right? Yeah. So that also becomes a conversation which is very interesting, because you will think very similarly in certain ways, think very differently, and it will add something very different to what we're thinking about.
That sounds fun. I'm always in, like, just let me know what you have in mind, and awesome. I would love to like, whatever you want to do. Like, I'm totally up for it.
Perfect.
Awesome, man. I really hope this platform grows, and I've had an amazing conversation, and I feel like
this is the second time we're having such a extended, wonderful conversation. Thankfully, this one's recorded so people can watch it.
Exactly. And it almost feels like you and I are sitting in a bar and discussing, because it has that organic feeling to it, and it's quite nice. Like, and you know what, like, my social battery is not running out, so which is great.
That's a good sign, right? I'm very happy. I mean, with you, like probably a few words that I want to share with you. Like, your friendship with me means a lot to me. Like, there was a point where I looked at you as, okay, Anand Radhakrishnan, the amazing artist, and oh my God, what will I ask him? And from that, it has transitioned to a very different view. But a more intimate and deeper sense. Like, I don't have to worry about what things I can ask you. It's a very friendly, genuine place. And I've reached a point where I crave those kind of bonds with people, even with artists. Like, I don't feel the fear of talking to an artist anymore. And with you, when I talk to you, maybe for the sake of these conversations, I have to put on my artist cap and ask you certain artistic questions. But when we meet up, our conversations are much wider and bigger, and like more, like even more interesting at some point. Yeah. So I thank you for that friendship to me. That really means the world to me.
No, thank you for saying that. And likewise, dude. Like it's been really good. Every conversation you and I have had, there's something that I already told you, like the thing that I got from the last conversation, right? And every time I speak to you, there's something that I learn more about my own career and my own like art, and that's always a great thing. So I'm as thankful to it as you are. So I'm really glad.
Thank you so much. That really means the world to me. Awesome. Chalo. Take care.
Cheers, man.
I won't take too much of your time.
Alrighty. Good night. Thank you so much.